Welcome, everyone, to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. I'm Justin, your host, and today I'm joined by Dale from thebitcoinshepherd.com. But before we start, a quick word from our sponsor. The Australian Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by hardblock.com.au, Australia's first and oldest Bitcoin-only exchange. Hardblock aims to help their users save in hard money and to become self-sovereign Bitcoiners. Hardblock has no added fees on deposit, buy, or sell transactions. So the prices are what you see is what you get. Hardblock's Bitcoin withdrawal fees are also among the cheapest in Australia, including a very low 99 sat Bitcoin withdrawal cost when using their new auto send feature. Check out Hardblock today. All right, Dale, how's it going?
Living the dream. How are you going?
Yeah, likewise. And I guess just for a bit of context for viewers, this is obviously an interview with you, and I'm keen to get your origin story, I guess, as it were, in terms of your personal journey into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You're doing work with both Crypto News in terms of writing, as well as having your own Bitcoin business, which is the bitcoinshepherd.com. And so I'm keen to, get your opinion about what got you into Bitcoin and how both of those, business journeys are going too. As well as anything else that comes up tangential, as it often does with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to say, unless there's something that's on your mind, something you've seen or heard recently, or something that you wanted to sort of get out, you can always just jump straight into your personal Bitcoin journey.
Yeah, cool. Well, I won't go too much into detail into my background because I don't think it's that interesting. But, my background is in law and in real estate. I spent a little time in real estate tech too. And I was a commercial director at a property company in Adelaide before moving across to northern New South Wales in 2020, and kind of that's when Bitcoin really clicked for me. So I've always been interested in investments. I've been investing my whole professional life. I was kind of the Warren Buffett school of thought, if you like, value investing. And I wasn't a stock picker. I'm a terrible trader. I think most people probably are. But that was kind of my natural inclination. I've also always been interested in macro and geopolitics. And, I moved across to northern New South Wales in 2020, just as COVID hit. And, obviously the real estate market was knocked a little bit at the time. And, I was kind of thinking, well, what am I going to do? And jobs weren't sort of forthcoming. And interestingly enough, I was sitting on a fairly reasonable sort of cash position that we had brought across from South Africa when we moved. As you can tell, I'm a South African. And so we had sold a property across in South Africa, and, we had just sat mostly in cash. And I thought this was a good opportunity to study a bit more because I'm, sort of academic inclined. So, did a financial planning diploma. And in the process, just started coming across Bitcoin. And, I first heard about it in 2013, and I just thought it was silly. In 2017, when it collapsed, I thought, finally. It didn't make sense to me because there wasn't like a business, there wasn't a cash flow. I just didn't think it had any intrinsic value. But the reality was, like, literally just like most people today, like, I just dismissed it without actually looking at it. And so that's kind of my loss in the end. And so 2020, it kind of, it dawns on me that this is time now to go and have a look at our sort of personal portfolio, our household portfolio, and say, okay, what sort of allocation should we be making to various assets, particularly since markets were down. And I was always one of those guys who was like, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. So ultimately, slowly but surely started seeing Bitcoin popping up. And it was actually Raoul Pal who I came across initially. And, I know Bitcoin is aren't too fond of him these days because he's got a Bored Ape NFT as a Twitter profile pic. But between him and Simon Dixon, things started really clicking because, Simon Dixon says something along the lines of like, if government's just printing all this money, like, why are we paying tax? And I was like, that makes sense. So I first made like a little allocation in July of 2020, which was my first buy. And obviously in hindsight, I wish I sort of piled in. But, slowly but surely I thought, okay, I need to actually dig deeper into this because there's a there. And I was also like very interested in it from like a philosophical perspective. So one of my degrees was in political philosophy. So I thought this was really interesting, separating the state from money. And so I went about and put together like a thesis, which was something along the lines of the case for a non-zero allocation in Bitcoin. I kind of stole a line from Lyn Alden and sort of put together like an 80 odd page investment case for Bitcoin, just really sort of painting it just for my own edification, frankly. And then, and then I started increasing my allocation, and then I said, I'm going to switch out gold and I'm going to put, rather just do Bitcoin. And then I started going, what's the point of a 60-40 portfolio? Let me just put that 40% into Bitcoin. And then, as we know, slowly but surely, you kind of go, well, what's the point of these equities? I prefer Bitcoin. So that's how it ended.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, because I think being a trader or being even a long-term investor in the stock market or even in property market, like you need to know so many things about so many things, and you need to never stop learning about it. Whereas Bitcoin, I mean, I think once you get into Bitcoin, you never stop learning about it. You always want to learn more, but there could come a point where you can just stop and say, I know enough, and I know enough, and I'm confident enough that it's going to be here for a long time. That can just be my main mode of investment. That can just be where the excess money goes. It just makes sense to kind of land there, and especially your background, and then doing that, essentially like writing a thesis of the investment strategy and proposal yourself. And I think you can't kind of come to terms with it in that way unless you do delve into some of the philosophical underpinnings, like you mentioned. And I would imagine your background in law would prime you to understand that state and money and the separation thereof, because that's kind of baked into most law, really, isn't it? Where government should have like a legislative arm that they are kind of responsible to, or I'm probably not describing that the right way, but essentially saying like laws and government, they're kind of intertwined, but they should be somewhat separate. Like judges shouldn't be a part of the government and should actually be able to then make decisions or hold government accountable, similar to
correct.
Police and law.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. There's supposed to be tension, healthy sort of checks and balances between the executive and the legislature who kind of making the laws, and then the judiciary who are adjudicating on the laws. So what you're saying is making total sense. And I think, look, in terms of what you were kind of alluding to earlier is, people kind of reach a threshold that's sufficient for them to invest in. And what I tend to tell people is, when it comes to Bitcoin, if you don't have a level of conviction and like a reasonable level of conviction, you're going to get shaken out your position so fast, because this is a volatile asset, and necessarily so. And so you have to do the work. There's no shortcuts here. And I guess that's what led me to create the business at the end of the day, because I wanted to kind of help orange pill beginners, because I wasn't at a point where, I could school intermediate folks. Like, obviously that I could, as you said, we were always on this journey, always on a learning journey, and I was still very green, but I knew I had done the work. I'd sort of done hundreds of hours to get to the point where I can now sort of orange pill someone, a no coiner, and I can help them sort of take something that's difficult to see and make it impossible to unsee it afterwards. You know what I mean?
That's such a good way of putting it. And this was literally the phrase on my mind, where you've obviously seen a lot of things that can't be unseen, like that separation of state and money, even the idea of, why are we paying taxes if money can just be printed? Taxes 100%. Then are viewed as, this is just like a social compliance thing, rather than actually checks and balances and tension. Because if every time the government printed money, there was some level of repercussion from society, they might not print it so much. But that's not the way that printing works. That's the way that taxes might work. But we've kind of seen a movement away from taxes in terms of where the government gets the majority of their money. So I think you need to have some epiphanies like that you don't walk back from. And I think some of that is helpful, but like Raoul Pal and Simon Dixon, like I've consumed so much of their content, probably not anywhere near as much recently, because especially Raoul Pal kind of going down the shitcoin route a little bit more. But he pivoted to Bitcoin at like such a prescient time. Like he sold, if I remember this right, like the majority of his gold and moved into Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was just, that was what he was all in essentially. And then it's over time, that's kind of gradually eroded, and he's gone, I think he says he holds like one Bitcoin and that's it, and the rest of the shitcoins. But still, the kind of macro understanding that they both have, and understanding business and entrepreneurship and kind of markets psychologically, when you have people like that kind of spruiking Bitcoin and kind of like, opening our eyes to some of these things, as well as doing some of that, your own personal exploration of like, why taxes, why should the state control the money, even things like intrinsic value, like some of those like very deep philosophical things that underpin most of our decisions. It's hard not to unsee it after that point, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're saying is right in terms of, you have your own sort of personal interaction with Bitcoin, if you like, and when I describe Bitcoin to beginners, I sort of say, look, there's the sort of technological advancements, then there's the sort of the economic side of things, and then there's this philosophical side. And so straight, like I always tell people, I sort of, I came for the money, but I'm staying for the revolution, as it were. And then, I take kind of my, I guess I came in from like, initially like a little bit greedy, if I'm perfectly blunt, you go, geez, this is an asymmetric bet of the decade. And then slowly you begin to uncover and you see, wow, this is a real game changer, in terms of kind of revolutionizing the monetary system. But then what you do is you kind of triangulate that with all sorts of other voices who you kind of, you look at and you say, these are folks who've got kind of multi-decade horizons, people who've seen all sorts of things. So, I drew a lot of info from the likes of, I don't know if you know old Lyn Alden. She's probably, I think, one of the most balanced thinkers.
She's amazing.
Just phenomenal. Like, I just don't have enough good things to say about her. And there were also a couple. Paul Tudor Jones. He wrote this seminal piece in May, I think, of 2020, which later sort of. They called it like the great monetary inflation. And so I started looking at these. These were like sort of heavy hitters in the macro world that started sort of punting Bitcoin. I started thinking like, clearly they see something there. They've lived through the sort of 1970s, which was historically, the inflationary decade when gold really shone. And I thought, well, based on all the indicators that I'm seeing right now, all the unprecedented levels of debt and money printing, it looks as if the macro conditions are perfect for this sort of for an asset that's whose quantity you can't just arbitrarily increase at a whim.
Exactly right. And I think what makes that even more credible when you hear it from some of those sources is that, like, Lyn Alden, for example, wasn't a Bitcoiner to begin with. She's like gradually gotten to that position, and even still, she's very balanced about her view. I wouldn't call her a Bitcoin maximalist. I wouldn't say she's all in on Bitcoin, but at the same time, she has some very convincing things to say and has seen both sides of the argument. I imagine Paul Tudor Jones is kind of similar to that. And it's sort of good. Yeah, it's good hearing pro-Bitcoin things with a very nuanced take from people that haven't just been all in and full on Bitcoin since the very beginning. Because look, even people that are all in on Bitcoin and have very nuanced takes, to me, like, you need a bit of adversarial thinking. Like, you need a bit of, again, that kind of tension or checks and balances. So it seems more credible to me coming from a source like Lyn Alden or Paul Tudor Jones, perhaps, that aren't completely incentivized to just be barreling ahead with Bitcoin. This is a conclusion they've come to naturally. Same as, Michael Saylor is obviously very much all into Bitcoin now, but he started at a position of like, oh, Bitcoin, what's that? That doesn't sound like it's got any legs. And then, years go on and he starts to realize, I'm kind of understanding, the asymmetric trade here and the kind of technology that it has to offer. So I think nuanced takes are, they're probably fewer in this space, but are even more important and more significant to me when it comes to, clarifying my own view and seeing if I'm like being myopic in my opinion here. Yeah,
totally. I couldn't agree more. And like, I have to kind of check my confirmation bias every now and then. My wife regularly tells me I must try and think more like Lyn Alden because Lyn, I force her to listen to podcasts all the time when we do driving and whatnot. And I just think Lyn is just so incredibly balanced. I mean, what she said about sort of 2017 was, when there was that sort of existential crisis, it was, how's Bitcoin going to respond now with this hard fork? That was a big deal. And I think at that point she sort of said, look, I'm not participating in this particular round, but it's only when the facts changed, then suddenly she sort of realized, okay, now that was a real crisis, was a real existential threat to the protocol. It's emerged on the other end. It looks robust and strong, and now I think this is a good entry level opportunity. And she's done the same now for energy markets. I mean, I remember, and again, I'm kicking myself probably because I also don't have enough fiat, but she was talking last year about, coming energy prices going up, and she was investing heavily in things like uranium and all sorts of other commodities, which obviously over the last sort of few months have completely taken off.
Yeah, she. You can tell from her writing that she has that critical or adversarial mind. Like I recall reading one from her, which was all about the network effects. And it really had a hard look at like, well, will Bitcoin actually win? Like, what are the reasons that some of the other hard forks haven't won historically and won't in future, as well as one very recently that she put out about money, just like the history of money, why we converge on, the best money. And therefore why we'd probably be moving away from fiat currencies and why we won't be going to other types of cryptocurrencies. And I don't think I've actually read her one on energy, but I've heard so many podcasts with Lyn that I get the kind of general context, but I'll have to look that one up as well. Because, again, you can tell that she's writing not just for everyone else, but she's doing it probably for herself to some degree too. Like, let me really drill into this and find out, like, am I just hearing bullshit on Twitter, or is there actually some level of credibility to this? And what is the other side saying? And it's
that's
good
exactly
to have that
the right way. That's exactly the right way. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of Bitcoiners have, because you kind of say, well, it's the fastest horse in the race. Why should we invest in anything else? But I think occasionally you got to kind of just do a little sense check. And the likes of Lyn, are perfect people to sense check against, because as you say, very balanced person, and I think it's and that's the reason why I actually wrote that my thesis was because I wanted to really just clarify it for myself, my thinking. I want to get my sort of intellectual framework around Bitcoin really solidified, and it's helped me so much in my conviction. So I imagine it's the same for Lyn.
Definitely. Look, writing, just generally speaking, really helps with that, doesn't it? I mean, I feel like with education and like honors and master's level, you've done enough theses and dissertations and everything else that you don't ever want to write again. However, every time I do sit down and try to think to myself, like, what am I actually trying to say here? Like, what is this sentence meant to mean? What's the stuff that comes after it meant to mean? That really helps you just hone it down to not be too superfluous, but then to be able to just be a better educator as well. And of course, to give yourself conviction if it is something like, what am I going to put my money into? I'm curious to go back a step. You mentioned earlier on that, one of the reasons that you looked into Bitcoin and maybe initially dismissed it was that, it doesn't have a cash flow or doesn't have a yield. How I've read something really recently that helped to kind of clarify this for me as well. But I'm just curious, like, what conclusion did you come to about that particular problem that made you go, oh, well, that's probably not such of an issue?
Yeah, I think the initial hurdle is just to say, like, I think I had an issue overcoming the idea that something that is digital can have value. And I think that's the major hurdle. So, and it was Lyn Alden. I'm sorry, this podcast shouldn't all be about Lyn. We should tag her, but
I will indeed.
It was something that she had said where it was in relation to sort of like, and I don't play sort of online games and that kind of thing, but I know there's all these games that people play online where you have like these limited edition packs and all these things, and these things actually have like a market value. There's a marketplace and people are trading them, and so the first thing you got to understand is the notion that something that is physical can actually have value in itself. And so value is not determined necessarily by cash flow, because then you also have to think about what makes gold valuable. And then you think, well, part of it is, its quality as money, it's scarce, it's, it's durable, it's transferable, it's portable, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what sort of like got me down that rabbit hole a little bit in terms of just understanding, like, okay, the intrinsic, this thing has no intrinsic value argument doesn't necessarily have legs. And I would refer anyone listening to Lyn Alden's piece on it, because she would articulate it a lot better than I.
It's so true, isn't it? Like, there is nothing really has an intrinsic value. It's all just subjective. It's all like what value we put on it. A very long time ago when I used to game, because now it just feels like a dead end kind of thing to do. And that sucks, because gaming used to be like a nice outlet. So maybe I'll get that back at some point. But anyway, very long time ago, I played I think of the very first, or one of the very first massively multiplayer MMO type games called Ultima Online. And one of the things I did as I get further and further into it and had just like lots of different characters that were all kind of maxed out was I would just grind for gold and then sell gold on a marketplace for real dollars. And sometimes you would pick up items as well. And I'm not talking like a small amount. Like you would chart, and this is when I was like 13, 14. So when people are paying you like $50 to $100 for gold that you've managed to farm in just the span of a couple of hours, like that's a really cool thing to do. And every once in a while you get an item, a special item that's relatively rare that you don't need because you've already got 5 because you've been mining or farming this whole time. And then people are like, oh, I'll pay $150 for it because otherwise I'll have to spend 15 hours trying to mine for that. Or farm for that. Sorry, I keep saying mining, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something like, I think maybe that being in my history made me realize like people will just buy whatever they want so they don't have to put the time into it. And that's where value is for the most part. And so maybe I was already kind of honed to realize that nothing has a subjective value. It's like if someone wants that and they'll pay money for it, that's the value that it is. And if you can offer that to them and you can maybe provide it for less of your own time, that's a pretty good trade to make.
Totally. And utility is part of it too, right? I mean,
absolutely.
So you're giving, so to you've got these surplus goods in the game. You don't necessarily need them, but they're gonna offer a lot of utility to somebody else. And so in that context, yeah, of course they have value. And then within the context of Bitcoin, like what's the utility of having sort of unconfiscatable, unseizable, permissionless, decentralized money? I mean, that's enormous. So. Yeah, again, that speaks again to the sort of intrinsic value of it.
I think that's probably the better way to approach it too, because I hear 2 different levels of answers to that question of like, where does Bitcoin get its value from? And I often give 2 different levels depending on like where the other person's at on their Bitcoin journey. And some just approach it as, oh, look, miners have to sacrifice a lot of energy and they need to buy really expensive hardware that's only good for one thing. And that's where it gets its money from or its value from. That it's like, it's backed by that. And you think, well, that's probably a really easy thing to understand, but it's not really it, is it? It's like all those other things that you just mentioned. It's the monetary properties. It's the confiscation resistance, the permissionless nature, the open nature, decentralized. Like it's all those things that actually give it its utility. That's what gives it its value. And yeah, it's good for people to think on it maybe on those 2 levels, because sometimes I do hear that top one or that first one being repeated a lot. It's expensive to mine. Therefore, that's what gives it its value. But that's still sticking to, I guess, the Keynesian economic principles rather than the Austrian economic principles, which is like, well, that's not really exactly it. There's more to it. It's got more utility than just being expensive to make to begin with.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that'd be good advice. Yeah.
Something else before I maybe move on to another topic, but Saifedean had a point in the fiat standard that was talking about yields and bonds and how sometimes traditional financial investors will look at Bitcoin and say, it doesn't have a yield. Whereas when I buy a bond, I get, that regular income, that cash flow from it. So like, why would I buy something like Bitcoin when I could just buy a bond? I mean, firstly, there's probably the obvious point that like most bonds have a nominal yield, but they don't have a real yield that's positive anymore. It's just quite negative. But correct. Apart from that, Saifedean put it in a really, really good way where he said, well, look, when you buy a bond, you have 100% of the downside possibility. So like the government or whoever you're getting that bond from defaults on that debt. So you get 100% downside possibility, but you only get a very fractional, small upside possibility, which is the yield. Because, of course, if the price of the bond goes up, the yield goes down and vice versa. So it's not really that great of a trade. Like you're taking on a lot of risk for very little reward. And in fact, now the real reward is negative. Whereas Bitcoin, on the other hand, you get 100% upside, 100% downside. Like if it goes to zero, it goes to zero, you lose all your money. But if it goes up, no one knows exactly where that's going to stop. And you get to actually reap all of those benefits. And of course, you forego the yield or the cash flow in the meantime, except for some services, third party that do that kind of thing. But just generally speaking about the asset, it's just a very different proposition. It's saying you get 100% of the upside if it happens, or 100% of the downside if that happens. Whereas bonds, you're getting 100% of the downside if it happens, but like 3% of the upside.
Marginal
or
upside.
The bond might be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
I thought that was a cool way of understanding it. I'm like, that's my go-to now when people talk about yield and Bitcoin not having it.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, and also if they want to, they can go and they can stake it with any one of these providers and get like a 3% yield. If they really care about yield, that there are these options.
Exactly.
Where you have crowds like Nexo, and I don't recommend this to people because I think it undermines the whole point of owning Bitcoin. But if yield's important to you, you could just stake it with like Nexo, and they've got a dashboard where you can actually see their kind of the reserve composition in real time. So if you were worried about it being, about the sort of credit worthiness of the company, or if they were engaging in risky behavior. Also, what was interesting is again, Lyn comes up again. She did a review on BlockFi, and I've also dabbled a little bit with their product just to see what it was all about, and I just did it on sort of the back of Lyn actually recommending it. So there are these options too, but that's an interesting point you mentioned, and I've bought the fiat standard, but it's on my reading list. I'm still plowing through the block size walls, so we'll get there.
I've got to get to the block size wars. I've seen a few podcasts about it, and it's a really fascinating history. But I often get stuck for the specific details when talking about it. So that just shows to me I need to read a bit about it as well to consolidate that.
Yeah.
And the fiat standard is good, but I'd say it's almost like the first 3 or 4 chapters. Once you get past that, then it really gets into probably what you're expecting to read in the fiat standard. The rest of it is, or the beginning parts are just a bit of a preamble that refers a lot back to the Bitcoin standard. But otherwise, I think, it's worth the read once you get into it.
Okay.
So in terms of moving into a Bitcoin focused business, because your background, like law, property, financial planning, I would say you could, just guessing here, you could probably fiat mine a whole lot more staying in those industries, or even just one of those industries, let alone combining them, than you probably could initially moving into a Bitcoin type business. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the motivators and how you've sort of balanced that potential risk, or just curious.
Yeah, it's strange. So if you look at my background, it's so diverse and varied. You kind of wonder, what is this boy interested in? And the reality is, like, it's hard to. I've really struggled to find kind of my niche, if I'm honest with you, and I've really found it now. That's the difference. What makes it difficult, if you like, is the fact that you're not necessarily going to be earning income from your passion. And so, I'm passionate about other things like the bush in South Africa, but it's not necessarily something that I could monetize. So going back to the question now, it's a challenging journey. So let's put it this way. Yes, I could go and I could probably have just continued a career as a commercial attorney. I could have stacked more sats, but I think the trade-off in terms of the quality of my life would be inferior. And it's just a fundamental lack of passion is ultimately what made me want to create my own business. And so I think really the $1 million question for, Bitcoiners who want to transition to creating their own Bitcoin business or otherwise want to work for a Bitcoin company is kind of, how do you go about doing that? And to me, it seems like it's a sort of iterative kind of process. It's not something that you can kind of just jump into and expect returns, because ultimately, like, we need cash. We need, cash flow is crucial if we want to A, stack sats, B, pay for living expenses, and otherwise just, you also have to kind of have a little bit of a cushion in life in terms of a little bit of, I think, a little safety buffer. When I first moved across to northern New South Wales and I had this opportunity to sort of figure out what I wanted to do, I didn't actually have any options. That was the funny thing. So I was constrained in terms of my visa. I wasn't able to work in a major metro. So I had to work in a regional area. So I was in northern New South Wales, and there weren't really property jobs going there other than the odd sort of residential property manager. I was like, I'm not doing that, right? So I've done tons of property management, and nobody calls you for good news. So I was like, I'm not doing this. I then decided, okay, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to combine Bitcoin and real estate. So I created. I thought, okay, I'm going to create this Bitcoin-backed real estate fund. And basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of these ridiculously low interest rates. We're going to take advantage of the fact that the Australian government will not allow the property market to tank, because there are like hundreds of millions of dollars invested in it, more than half of the average person's net worth, or 80%. I can't remember the figure offhand. Is tied up in this asset. It's almost like a protected class of asset. They're not going to let this thing tank. So let's take advantage of low interest rates. Let's raise $100 million. It was ambitious. Raise $100 million, buy, let's say, 20 to 25 different properties around the country, all new, all with 5-year maintenance contracts, outsource all the property management so you don't have to deal with it. And then what we do is we go to the bank and we're like, hey, we're going to borrow 40% against our property, and we can just buy Bitcoin and we're going to hold. And if at some point the investors want to sort of like cash out a portion so that we can then take, let's say take our initial investment out, pay the investors, and then we can just ride a Bitcoin position. That was the goal. So I went to Sydney. I tried to like pump my idea. I went to corporate finance people. I went to someone in Brisbane. I sort of was like kind of laughed out of the room, so to speak, or ignored, one of the two. So I said, all right, we've got to find some other way. So I then decided to create Bitcoin Shepherd. And that really was just through every time I was engaging with people socially, I was just talking about Bitcoin. And I realized that there was a need for some, like an actual offering in terms of helping people in that regard. So that's when I created Bitcoin Shepherd, and it really was just about like helping people understand Bitcoin from first principles. So it starts, it's really kind of the Saifedean Austrian economics thing where it's like, what is money? How do we evolve to using fiat, blah, 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 right? So once you've done that, how to buy it, how to store it in an Exodus wallet, and then let's get it into some sort of more cold storage type situation or multi-sig. And that's sort of what I had. But again, that's not like a viable income or viable business from day one. You're not going to necessarily be generating income. So I'm constantly on the hunt for more opportunities. I want to work in Bitcoin, and an opportunity comes across to write for crypto news. And then that expands to include editorials. So now Bitcoin Shepherd does a lot of content as well as editorial services, and basically, I write about Bitcoin as much as I possibly can, and I like to shit on shitcoins as much as I possibly can. In fact, today I get so much joy about writing about some of the shitcoins because I always just put my old cheeky little view in there. So I wrote a story today, for example, about this guy who bought Jack Dorsey's first tweet as an NFT in March of 2021. That was your story.
I read that this morning, actually. I love it. I know where it's going, but tell it anyway because I want people to hear.
So, someone paid like, I think it was 2.9 million US for Jack Dorsey's first tweet. And he tweeted at the time, this is not a JPEG. This is going to be viewed as the Mona Lisa. So he puts it up for auction and he's expecting about 50 million. Jack Dorsey cheekily responds. He says, I'm going to give half of this away to charity. So Dorsey comes back because now, the reins are freed. He can say what he wants. And he goes, why not 99%? Anyway, long story short, 7 days later, the auction closes. The highest bid is $280.
Yeah.
It's now up to 3,300, like 1.1 ETH. But what a laugh. So I do that. And so that's sort of like... So that's kind of my day job, and I really enjoy it. It keeps me sharp. It helps me... it's expanded my knowledge outside of Bitcoin. It's really it's heightened my sort of understanding of everything, but also my conviction of Bitcoin. And then I guess the last piece of the puzzle that I'm sort of just bolting on, because whenever there's opportunities, I kind of just jump on them, and I'll probably include more things down the track, is I've had people in South Africa reach out to me and say, can you help me with custodial services? And so I'm helping them put together these multi-sig solutions so that we can geographically disperse hardware wallets around the world. So these people are kind of like, sort of 100% confiscation proof in that sense. So, that's sort of what I do now as part of Bitcoin Shepherd, and I'm sure it's going to evolve and be something different down the track.
That is so cool. And I think like a place like South Africa, I mean, I've never been there, but and you're from there, obviously, so you'd know a lot more about it than me, but it sounds like that is something that's probably going to be very needed over there in terms of like better security with multi-sig. I'm not sure if you're aware of Craig Raw, who's the developer behind Sparrow Wallet. There's a podcast with him on Citadel Dispatch going back probably like 6 months or more. And he talks about his setup because he's in South Africa. He has, geo-distributed multi-sig, but he makes sure that it's through various government military checkpoints. That way, if someone does ever, home invasion or something along those lines, it is actually physically impossible for you to then get to your next multi-sig key without going through various authority figures. And I mean, distributing that even beyond the country that you're in into other countries too. I think that would be an incredible idea, and not just useful for people in South Africa. Obviously, I think this is a useful strategy for everyone to consider, especially as Bitcoin goes up in value, and especially as the ability of people to kind of monitor things on chain and link it to your personal identity, as that increases more as well, some of these more sophisticated ways of holding Bitcoin is going to be really important.
I totally agree. I mean, on the one hand, sort of, I want to go and put Bitcoin stickers on my car and drive down the highway hooting and screaming out Bitcoin out the window. But then you are at the same time sort of advertising that I've got a stack, and I'll always say to people, "Hey, I came in late, so I didn't have sort of millions of dollars, so to start off with. So you can imagine that I'm not sort of like incredibly flush, but I know that's why I can fully appreciate the folks who got in relatively early. Even the sort of 2017. I mean, even if you bought, in March of 2020, if you had a lot of conviction and you saw this dip and you're like, this is a great opportunity. Suddenly, I mean, I think now you're sitting on some pretty fantastic gains, and you necessarily are going to be a target. And so I think like OPSEC is something that it's something that's I've always had a sort of natural inclination to be like a little bit suspicious, just because of my kind of libertarian tendencies, and always trying to think a couple steps ahead. Also, being in South Africa, you got to be a little bit smarter from a security perspective and outthink people. But I think it's a journey, and there's always trade-offs. And I think, though, for the average person, who's just getting it, I tend to say to them, like, not to overcomplicate things in the beginning. It's really like a layered approach, and I'm still learning all the time. And I'd say that my OPSEC game is weak, and it's certainly not something that I kind of. It's something that I'm actually actively looking to improve, because I think we can all do better in the future. As you say, I think it's going to be even more important.
Definitely. And it's just that incremental process to doing, just prioritizing it more, learning a bit more about it, because the conflict is real. I'm right there with you. We're even doing a Bitcoin podcast in and of itself, horrible OBSEC. But I don't own any Bitcoin merchandise. I don't own any Bitcoin shirts or hats or anything like that can advertise it, but I want to. And every time I look at a shop and load up a shopping cart with things, I end up thinking like, all right, maybe not now. Maybe I'll just leave it. Maybe I'll buy some of this stuff later, or maybe if I do buy it, I'll decide I'm only going to wear it to bush bashes, or I'm only going to wear it to local Bitcoin meetups. But still, like there is a level of, I think for the local meetups at least, that might not be the best OPSEC. That would be the place you go if you wanted to survey who's a Bitcoiner, and wearing a Bitcoin shirt just solidifies it even more. But it's hard wanting to evangelize Bitcoin, wanting to let people know about it, but at the same time is still protecting yourself.
You know what? It sounds, and maybe this is just the South African in me, and maybe it's naivety, and maybe I'll be proven wrong in time. But my sense is that in Australia, the risk is great, like significantly less. I know there are organized crime, there's organized crime gangs, et cetera. But like, I do Muay Thai and stuff like that. And generally speaking, like, I would feel very comfortable if somebody tried to come in and give me some hell on the streets. Whereas in South Africa, like a 13-year-old, I'd be terrified, because the person probably has a knife or a gun, and they have no qualms about shooting or whatnot. So
that's it.
And it's very different. So I feel a lot safer here. But I think if I was in South Africa, it's such a tricky thing, because you really want to help spread the word, but at the same time, as you say, you also, I think the risk there is very real. And if you just sort of like, if you want to draw a parallel to it, it's sort of like that movie Traffic, where you have that people are like kidnapped, high net worth individuals, children are being kidnapped and to extort money. I think there's a possibility in the future that we're going to see these high value Bitcoiners targeted and then being extorted through these organized criminals, because there's just so much on the table. You can imagine in 10, 20 years where Bitcoin's likely to be.
Yeah, very true. And again, like privacy or lack thereof is kind of a low-hanging fruit for an attacker wanting to look on chain and identify people that just have poor OPSEC. It's getting easier to do that. I would call it non-trivial to do something like that now. But as time goes on, if people don't start using things like privacy tools better, even just on-chain privacy, and especially like, we're talking about taking their privacy in, I guess we can just call it meat space a bit more seriously. Yeah, the possibility of that just increases exponentially as the price goes up. That's like the return on violence increases, which means it's just more likely to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I think, the one thing you can do though, is if you are being quite evangelical, like I tend to be, is just to have a really robust security protocol put in place. And through a multi-sig, I think, if you've got like a 3 or 5, of which 2 keys are just completely out of your hands, like there's absolutely nothing you can physically do. And, people could do whatever they like to. I know, that with a cold card, there's, you can have this sort of like a spoof one where you can release, a little bit of Bitcoin, and that can be seen as like, okay, I've given up. Like I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, but to me, I think that's the single best thing, because I would probably rather, at least in Australia, earn the side of like being evangelical and trying to help people, help spread the word, if you like, as opposed to kind of trying to be insular and just protect my little stack and fly under the radar.
I agree with that, and that's also the reason that I've decided to become more public and talk about Bitcoin, because I feel like it's a net positive and it well outweighs the risks. And you're right, there's so many things you can do with just multi-sig setups, or even using things like passphrases, where you can have decoy wallets, or wallets that you would give to an attacker in a $5 wrench type attack. So there's lots of ways around it, and they're increasing every day. Essentially, this is a problem that Bitcoiners are intending to solve. So there'll just be more and more solutions.
Yeah, 100%.
It's really cool, the variety of what you have done since getting into Bitcoin. And like the self-custody stuff back in South Africa, the evangelizing, being able to write, and also be able to kind of call out shitcoins when you see shitcoins. I think that's all doing a good service to Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I'm curious, like going back to that property idea, that sounds to me like something that might get more traction now than it would have back then. Like, is that something that you've got in the back of your mind to say, all right, maybe that was too before its time at that point, like kind of being laughed out of some of those meetings? Like, do you think people would be more receptive to it once Bitcoin starts to become an acceptable asset?
Do you know what I was kind of told was, and I actually reached out to Stefan Levera, who, to his credit, actually like got back in touch with me, and just said, look, sorry, I don't see the value in this idea. So I really appreciated that feedback, because I was just trying to get some honest feedback, and I wasn't too precious about it. I would like, if I was someone who had a moderate risk profile. Let's say that most Bitcoins have a far higher risk tolerance than most, right? But let's say I'm a boomer. I've got a moderate risk profile, and I have I've got like a nice lump sum of cash. To me, if I could buy a property cash and then lever it up and buy Bitcoin, and then effectively have the tenant cover the interest payments for my Bitcoin position, and basically the question is, okay, even if interest rates blow out to 10% or 15%, I mean, anything's possible. I don't think they will, but is Bitcoin going to outpace the interest rate payments over 5 years, 10 years? I almost think unquestionably yes. So and if you gear it very conservatively, so I wouldn't say like let's go 75. I'd say percent. I'd say maybe let's do 20%. So. I think that the majority of feedback I got was really like, if you like property, you buy property. If you like Bitcoin, you buy Bitcoin. If you wanted to combine the two, you do it. I'm not sure. Like, I think what might happen in the future is there might be some sort of like unit trust, or the South African term's unit trust. I'm not sure I can't recall what the Aussie term is, but effectively where you could say you have. If it's more liquid, I think it would make sense. In other words, when you've got a Bitcoin ETF in Australia, and then you've got like a REIT, or residential investment trust index, and then you could literally have a unit trust that literally has an allocation of both, or investors could buy an allocation in either. But to my mind, I feel as if this is an opportunity for private investors, but I don't think it scales very well.
Gotcha. And like you say, it's more kind of moderate risk investors, maybe someone who's not completely behind Bitcoin yet, but would be comfortable with property and be willing to maybe take that extended risk into Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even 10%, imagine you just like, if you bought $1 million property and you just said, okay, I'm going to buy $100,000 of Bitcoin. And once the tenant's paid off my Bitcoin, I'm then just riding for free, and then I'm collecting a check from the tenant who's in the property. So it seems like a good idea to me if I was a boomer and I wanted to kind of spread the risk a little. But I've kind of given up on that, Justin.
It makes sense. I think when you get enough pushback from the industry, you learn to move on to other things. And there's so many other things that can be done in Bitcoin. And I think what you're doing in terms of the self-custody stuff, evangelizing Bitcoin, that's probably two of the greatest needed things at the moment, and probably will be for years to come. I can see like Stefan Livera's thought process, and maybe, I mean, I might be thinking about this differently to him, but I know some people in Bitcoin will buy Bitcoin, take a loan against the Bitcoin, over collateralized, and then use that to buy more Bitcoin. And I'm sure that's probably what he's thinking of. Like, well, why would you buy property? Like, why would you deviate? You might as well just like buy Bitcoin, loan against it, buy more Bitcoin. Or one that I've heard, which to me is like obviously a riskier strategy, because you're not sort of diversifying with property. And like you said, the Australian property market is more or less being propped up by government policies and government expenditure. So there is a way of hedging your bets that way. But a way that I've heard more recently, especially with the recent Bitcoin conference and the mining stage, is that if you have Bitcoin miners and they're producing hash, then there's about 30 different companies in the world now that will provide loans backed by those miners. And of course, at the same time, you are earning essentially passive return from those miners. And so you can, given that miner price more or less follows Bitcoin price to a certain degree, and they do have like a depreciating life cycle that you can map out, I would imagine that's where maybe some Bitcoiners would be thinking about that in comparison to property, where it's like, I'd rather buy Bitcoin miners in place of the property, earn cash flow from that, not have the kind of maintenance costs that you might have with a house, and still be able to loan out against it and then buy more Bitcoin, or even maybe just upscale my mining operation and buy more miners and then be able to loan kind of perpetually more, keeping, over collateralization in mind as a strategy. So yeah, I can see maybe that's where Bitcoin has come at this from, and be like, why would I buy boomer real estate? I could just buy like Bitcoin real estate, which is miners.
Totally. Exactly. And when I think about diversifying, I actually think about buying a couple assets, the hosted facilities that that Compass Mining and those kind of folks have. That's what I'm thinking about. So I think I don't want to say the idea was dead on arrival. I did get a few meetings, but I think in the end, I just imagined like there would be a real estate investment trust who had some cash on their balance sheet and would kind of want to do a sailor, like Easton. So anyway, we'll see. The way I'm thinking about kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis through Bitcoin Shepherd is that, I'm going to be following where the opportunities are, and I'm going to be looking for the needs of the industry and really going that way. Because, initially, obviously, if you were in the beginning, you can sort of, if you were like an intermediary, like an exchange, that's a great, you're effectively like a toll keeper. And I think that's great. I mean, it's a fantastic business model, but I think that's now sort of, I guess that train's left for the most part. Maybe there's opportunities, but I'd say probably not. Then you've got all the hardware and you've got all the software and infrastructure. So I think for me, I'm just looking at other opportunities down the track. And as soon as they become visible, I'll jump on them. I'll give you one, Justin, just as an example. Yesterday, I went for lunch at a place here in Brisbane called Crypto Coffee. And essentially, it's the value proposition is basically you can pay with crypto. I mean, they accept shitcoins and everything. All the menu is just sort of like it's all just like I don't even know what, like a Ripple sandwich or whatever.
Yeah, like crypto themed kind of thing.
Yeah, all those kind of things. Okay, so it was a good idea. The execution was pretty poor, and what was quite interesting though is that they had like these barcodes on the table where you could scan and get $20 in free Bitcoin from an exchange here in Australia. And, and through that affiliate scheme, I'm going to imagine that over time, that's going to actually be as profitable, if not more profitable than the actual operations of the business itself.
Yeah.
And provided you execute well in that. So I was thinking, well, if you had a Bitcoin coffee shop and you had a Bitcoin exchange here in Australia, and you obviously need to be a coffee shop operator and know how to do that well. But I thought, those, like, that's not an opportunity I'm going to pounce on, but it's certainly like these are the kinds of things that I'm always keeping my eyes open for, because I just really love what I'm doing, and I'm just constantly on the hunt for opportunities.
Definitely. And look, I think passive investment and passive returns, is probably always good to work into anyone's strategy. And yeah, if you can have something like that where you're delivering a service at the same time as educating people and sort of funneling people towards Bitcoin, but then you can actually get some passive return from that as well. Yeah, that sounds brilliant. And I think opportunities like that will just keep popping up, won't they? Because like a 0 to 1 moment like Bitcoin, it never dawns on us the complexity and the kind of options that it might provide until we get to version 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then all of a sudden there's just a lot of brilliant ideas. And the beautiful part about an open network is most people are happy to advertise what they're doing. And things are pretty easily replicable in another country. So if we see something happening overseas, taking that idea and iterating on over here or something is, it's like a no-brainer, really. I think that's just going to happen more and more over time.
100%. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you don't necessarily, it's not going to be a 0 to 1, as you say, but it's going to be sort of like you can actually do like a 1x, and it's still there's still a big opportunity in that potentially. So that's sort of how I'm looking at it. And I think I describe the whole ecosystem as sort of greenfields. I think that there are plenty of opportunities. I think that the most obvious ones in sight have I think a lot of those have been captured right now. But as the industry matures over time, I think more and more things will arise. But I think it's really crucial to obviously just listen to the market and see what they want. And I believe like you will have, but I think you'll have Bitcoin themed. Or you could have crypto themed, I guess, like restaurants, coffee shops, or whatever. Because just recently, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, they decided to create like a pop-up restaurant, and they had queues around the neighborhood. Like, I think it's a great way to de-risk a restaurant. Like, if I was going to have to create a restaurant, you're going to go get everyone excited about this sort of JPEG and have people queuing to taste a burger from two people who probably haven't been in the restaurant business. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. And so I'm really, I guess, to go back to your original point, Justin, it's just basically, yes, there's lots of opportunities to earn fiat and stack more Bitcoin, if you like, through law or real estate or whatever. But I can't tell you what a breath of fresh air it is to be doing something you love. It gives you so much more hope and optimism for the future.
Definitely. There is a book, what's his name? Mark Manson, called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yes.
I talked about this a lot in my past work in psychology. And I think the way that he lays things out, which is kind of don't look at the things that you want to do, look at the kind of problems that you want to have. And if you choose a vocation, rather than a job, but choose something that is going to present you with the problems that you want to have, and then of course give you the reward that you're comfortable with as well. That's the sort of thing that you should go towards. And the kind of problems that we want to have, or that we kind of come across, I think, working in a Bitcoin space, is having a lot of conversations about Bitcoin, dismissing some of the FUD, learning constantly, kind of iterating new ideas, generating new ideas related to the Bitcoin space that can leverage off the technology. And like, those are all really cool problems to have, at least in my mind, and obviously yours too, which is, I think, where we get that quality of life improvement from, that passion from. And sure, you might be able to earn more money doing something else initially. I do think Bitcoin will kind of look after the people that evangelize and push it forward in the long term anyway. But you can't pass up that quality of life. You can't pass up that that meaning and value that you derive from doing something that you're passionate about. So yeah, I'm right there with you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, man.
I was curious to take like just a bit of a tangent into NFTs, and I don't know, I don't know a whole lot about NFTs apart from I think that most of it's ridiculous. I do think that there is some benefit to, say, giving original artists like an irrevocable royalty right. So every time, say, an NFT gets sold of a piece of music or artwork or whatever, that the original artist gets some cut of that every single time. I think that is really cool. Obviously, the problem being, like, we need network effects, and there needs to be like one main platform, or they need to be interoperable. And so I can kind of see some of the benefits of NFTs. I think what's going on now is probably like a huge hype cycle. But look, the query that I had for you, and it's sort of putting you on the spot a bit, but I have this theory that a lot of the big sales that we see in NFTs at the moment, they might have, at least some of them, or maybe a lot of them, have something to do with money laundering. And like, I'll give you an example of what I mean. And this is just sort of a thing that sort of popped up. I've seen it a couple of times online where I'm like, all right, other people are thinking this too. And I was just curious because you've got more experience in that particular field than I do, just based on your writing and investigations and whatnot. But like, say if you had, I don't know, say if you had $1 million in Ethereum and you went, okay, I'm going to mint an NFT under a different identity, and then I'm going to buy my own NFT and I'm going to put a price tag of $1 million on it. So you now have both an NFT that seems to be worth $1 million, and you still have your $1 million of Ethereum, of course, because you've just paid yourself. Mm-hmm. Even if someone then lowballs that at some point and says, I want to buy it from this person for $200,000 because I know it's worth about $1 million and maybe I'll be able to flip it. You can just accept that $200,000 bid, and now you have $1.2 million of Ethereum. And all you had to do was spend an afternoon, generating an NFT if you've got enough of an online presence, or you can pay someone to kind of like boost that online presence. There is a really kind of quick way to turn, well, I guess a little bit of money into a lot more money, just by like buying your own stuff, or even buying your own stuff with money that might be like off the record, that you want to make it now taxable income, to say, hey, I'm an artist and someone just bought this for $1 million. I have no idea who that was, but now I have $1 million, and that's a nice taxable event, which I can now have, clean and on the record, when technically maybe you had $1 million that wasn't on the record to begin with, that you just paid yourself. Like, I don't know, do either of those two kind of intermingled theories have any kind of traction, do you think, in the space?
Yes, they do resonate. So I think, okay, I'll preface this by saying I'm no shitcoin expert, right? And I'm certainly not an on-chain expert. But so OpenSea was kind of the incumbent, if you like, and they had sort of like the bulk of market share. Then a crowd by the name of LooksRare came along, and they sort of captured a huge amount of volume very quickly. And I can't remember where the story was. It was the back end of last year, I think, and there was some work done, again, I'm not sure, by, I think, some on-chain analytics crowd. I don't want to say chain analysis, but something like that, where they found that a huge amount of it was what you were describing, wash trading. I'm selling to myself like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times over. And look, if you're sufficiently, what's the word now? Sophisticated, you can 100% launder money through NFTs. So if you've managed to, let's say, through some sort of DeFi hack, of which there's one a month minimum, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week. But if you, let's say,
there's a website called the Rect Leaderboard. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that before, but I'll maybe link that in the show notes, because it's just very telling to see just the ridiculous amount of money that's being rug pulled or scammed or hacked from some of these projects.
Like malinvestment writ large is what I call it. Yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, so to go back to that. So let's say you go and you manage to take, let's say you manage to hack or exploit $1 million worth of ETH. You then, as you say, you then create a couple of different NFTs, and you can create a collection. You can create a bunch of different accounts. They're all anon. There's no KYC. And then you can just engage in a bunch of random kind of wash trading, and then to the point where it looks as if there's this credible track record. Maybe you've got yourself a little collection. Suddenly some, again, ignorant soul thinks, oh, this person might be, someone who's rich, let's say, and they kind of go, oh, this person, I'm just going to ape into this and let me just buy that. And so, I think that 100% happens. So I think I always like to talk about, the signal from the noise. And I think like most of NFTs is just pure and utter noise. It's pure and utter hype. And I think money laundering is a big part of it. I think the biggest application for it long term, sure, there's digital art. And I think, yes, I agree with you. The recurring revenue streams to share with artists is good. I think also like the democratization of art, in the sense of, these gatekeepers who kind of can block artists, and the same thing will happen with music. So I think there are these benefits, right? I mean, in that regard, so I'm supportive of that. What I think is actually going to be done is the majority of it's going to be incredibly boring, and we're not even going to know it's an NFT. So like your passport, if you got a Vax passport, if that was a thing, let's say, for example, and some of the, like your educational records, and just so something that is sort of unfalsifiable, something that you could then store in some sort of digital wallet, like maybe you'll earn your degrees and then they'll get sent to you as an NFT. So that or a letter of recommendation from your university. So if you want to go do articles at a law firm, whatever it is, that boring stuff, you're not ever going to know what rails it's coming on. But I think that's kind of like the signal. The JPEGs, I think, are just noise, and I have absolutely no clue why. Like, I can see why maybe crypto punks and these early, I think crypto kitties, I think they're all funny, have value, okay? In the sense that people, to some people, where they go, oh, these are early, right? Oh, yeah. But what I don't get is just like the things like Bored Apes, which is just like, as more celebrities buy, it's like a celebrity, look at me, I'm rich flex. And I just... it's again, to go back to utility, you think to yourself, like, I don't understand what value these have outside of being able to demonstrate my wealth, because you're not going to like have a, if I wanted to as well, like I could literally just right click and if I wanted to, I could also I could create it as my profile pic. I could print it and hang it on a wall at home. I mean, I just think it's rife with so much bullshit. It's I think it's pitiful, and I wrote a story last week because I love it. This is where I say I like shitting on things. Liverpool Football Club, who I don't support, they released this whole series of NFTs called LFC Heroes, cartoon images of all the team, and only 6% of the collection sold during the auction period. I mean, if that doesn't speak volumes, like, this thing is running out of steam. And I have a really good mate of mine who was trading it, and this stuff it's very volatile, and you can make a lot of money trading this stuff but you have to be on it 24/7. You have to be in like 5,000 Discord channels. But I mean, my mate bought something called a crypto dick, and that's when I sort of said, "Listen, bro, you've lost me." It's a crypto dick NFT collection, and they were actually they were tens of thousands of dollars. It's just ridiculous. Maybe not quite that much, anyway.
But if people kind of aping their money into apes is what helps to bootstrap some of the things that you mentioned earlier on there, in terms of NFTs being used for things like passports or academic records, or I'm not sure if that links to like a decentralized identification type program, which would be like a useful use case for it. And yeah, look, if people aping into apes helps to bootstrap that by giving developers more money and more reason to iterate on this technology, then look, people can do whatever the hell they want with their money. I think it's stupid, but at the same time, if that helps to advance technology, maybe that's a net positive overall. Sometimes I think the argument from Bitcoin is it detracts too much from Bitcoin, or it takes liquidity out of what would otherwise be in Bitcoin. But I think that's a short-term stage. Inevitability, most of it collapses back into Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing NFTs on Bitcoin. I mean, the first NFT was on Bitcoin with colored coins anyway, and we have a few other ways of doing it, and there's more and more coming down the pipeline. So I do think it's going to be around for a while. And if it helps in a net positive way by just advancing the technology, then sure, whatever people want to do with their money. But I'm there with you, I think, in terms of the overall perspective of it.
I tend to, I agree on all fronts, man. Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, when moving into like Bitcoin, writing about kind of the crypto space generally, what has people's reactions in your personal life been? I mean, look, as long as it's not too personal to kind of talk about some of the people even close to you, but sometimes even looking at like, what did your significant other think about it, and what did your family think about it? As long as you don't think that's sort of too personal to go into. I'm always curious. Yeah.
No, I'm an open person, man. So do you mean in respect of kind of how they've received my Bitcoin evangelical sort of stance, or kind of, or in relation to not necessarily my writing, but the fact that I've now kind of taken on this persona, or this has now become part of my identity, quite frankly?
Yeah, I think both. Like, talking about Bitcoin and then deciding, hey, look, I'm going to not do those things that I was doing before that I've been qualified for, and I'm going to do this Bitcoin thing instead. Like, I think both of those are useful kind of like trains of thought for people to know, like, you're not alone if you're getting pushback from significant others or something like that.
Totally. Look, so I think I'm very blessed to have a supportive like structure around me, in terms of my wife and my family. So they've all just been fantastic. I've had success in orange putting a lot of people close to me. I've had a couple like people who, strangely enough, I've had people who tried to orange pill me in 2016, and I told them basically to fuck off. Because stop talking about this thing, because they didn't explain it properly, and like it didn't click. And obviously, I regret it, obviously. But I think generally speaking, I've been really encouraged by all the support I've had from people. I think what they see though is like a different side of me, in the sense of the drive and the energy and the enthusiasm and the passion. I think that's really the difference. That's why, I mean, the study that came out of Queensland, one of the uni there, where, Bitcoins are, psychopaths and not narcissistic. Yep. I was just like, you really don't know, because I'm actually happier and more generous and kind and understanding, and I have more hope and optimism than ever. And it's all because of what I'm doing. And that's why I don't want Bitcoin to become like the secular religion in my life, but I feel as if overall it's been incredibly beneficial. And I'm always trying to sense check myself, but it's had such a positive impact in so many different ways, like from, just giving meaning to mental health. It's just, and I've had a lot of success. I think, getting like my dad, who is a basic Warren Buffett disciple, to buy Bitcoin, to open up an Exodus wallet, that was a huge thing for me. Getting my sister to dump some money into it, that was great. And I've got family members talking to me, and I've got friends who are now reaching out, and they usually lead with like, I hear you into crypto. And I'm like, no, I'm into Bitcoin. It's not the same, okay? It's like saying I'm into, it's like I'm into UFC, all right? I'm not into WWE. That's the difference. They're very different games, okay? Yeah. So, but broadly speaking, like I think, the feedback has been really good. Of course, some people just get fed up with me talking about it all the time. And I do find it sometimes spending time with normies can be challenging, because they're talking about so much irrelevant bullshit that I'm not interested in. Like, what sort of reno are you going to be doing on the house this year? Or like, what kitchen countertops you got? But there comes then my sort of empathy and hope and optimism, where I kind of, have learned how to manage that. So, yeah, man, I feel that it's over the sort of the last couple of years, and it's been a short journey. It's been super positive. I don't know how have you found the transition in your life?
Probably similarly, where to begin with, it was just talking to people about Bitcoin a lot, which normally was pretty off-putting for people. I don't think I was going about it in the right way, and I was probably too forceful with like, hey, this is really important, everyone should listen. Whereas now I am much less inclined to even bother opening the conversation about Bitcoin unless someone comes to me initially, or it's a person that we already bond and connect on that Bitcoin front. So I know they're going to be receptive to it. But generally speaking, most people around me were supportive of me doing pretty much whatever I wanted, because I think they could see, again, the meaning and passion that I derived from it. But I don't think they got it. Like, I think my fiance, it's only in the last year or so that she's now full on with Bitcoin as well. And she's like, why don't you try harder to convince me about this? I'm like, you were complaining that I was talking about this every night. Like, I couldn't go any harder than what I did. But same as family and friends. Like, when I mentioned that I was transitioning from psychology into this, most are like, why would you do that? But, I guess if you want to do that, why not? And you can always go back to it if it doesn't work out. And it's like, good, that's probably not exactly the way I wanted them to think about it, but that's a nice intermediary step where they're like, do what you want. You've always got a backup plan if you need to. And since then, people are now like, you're in the area that you should be in. Like, you can tell just by the way you talk about it, by how much extra time you spend on it beyond what you might get paid for or what you might think is going to be profitable. You can tell, like, that's when someone is in their zone, basically. And so
100%.
Generally speaking, I think people have become more supportive recently, especially I think price has a lot to do with it. When people see the price pump and they see more news, or they see On the Run is now going to be implementing, crypto payments, that's when people are like, oh, wow, this thing's not really going away, is it? And all of a sudden people it dawns on them a bit more about why I might be in this, even from just that financial perspective that they might not have seen initially. Like, sure, you're doing this for passion, but like, you need money to live too, right? And now they're starting to see, oh, you can get both of those from this thing. All right, maybe I should pay more attention to this too.
Yeah. 100. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's as And I use the term crypto because it's the ecosystem, and this is like, and that's why and even though personally, like, I don't invest in this stuff, I personally, like, I'm all Bitcoin, but what the broader awareness that it all brings, I think is a net positive, because I think it then opens up conversations just like you described, where people see, like, on the run are accepting crypto. And, like, again, I'm not going to be spending my sats on the run, but great marketing move, right? But at the same time, I would say, it's good that now someone's going to have a conversation with you and go, yep, this is not going away. And so all the naysayers, of which, look, I was part of them, are slowly but surely falling. And I think what I then tend to do, as you described earlier, is sort of that forceful approach is never going to work. I think having people come to you voluntarily and say, like, what's the deal with this? Okay. And that's, and then you can start having the conversation. And then I usually kind of go into fractional reserve banking and, sort of the evolution of money and the gold standard and fiat and all that kind of stuff. And then, what I've been doing lately, and I think actually this is quite effective, is I've been talking a little bit about how, like, Western Union, Visa, MasterCard, I mean, they're going to have their lunch totally eaten, because sort of layer 2, the Lightning Network is going to be the payments rail, whether people know it or not. Again, it doesn't matter. Now it's a little bit clunky from a UX perspective, but I show them, like, I can send you, and I showed my sister-in-law this morning, because I never stopped this orange pilling stuff. I'll send you like 5 sats, which whatever that was. I mean, literally talking at less than a cent. I can send you that instantaneously, final settlement for free. If you're a merchant and you're accepting Bitcoin, or now with Strike in the US with their announcement, you can actually say, I don't want Bitcoin, I just want dollars. And so someone can pay with Bitcoin, gets converted into dollars, and you literally get it on the other side, and it's all done through the Lightning rail. Virtually 100%. 100% of the sale goes to the merchant. You don't have that 3% middleman fee. It's instantaneous. There's no chargebacks. I mean, I think people don't quite see these things. So I sort of do the sort of on-chain side, and then I do the Lightning side. And a demo goes a long way. And I often just give people a few sats just as the first thing. I say, there we go. So this is what Visa's going to be terrified of, or probably already terrified of if they aren't.
I think that's probably the best way to approach it, is a demonstration. And anyone who understands things like the problem with chargebacks, or just losing money in between for like a fee for an intermediary, or if people know things about international settlements and the fact there's a lot of corruption in terms of those those payment processes, just being able to send someone some sats on like Blue Wallet or Moon Wallet or something like that, and it's just there, it's immediately there, that I think opens people's eyes to it a bit more.
Couldn't agree more. No, it's 100%. That is how I found success in orange pilling people. Because I think, I came in from a macro perspective, and I don't think that always resonates per se. Like, you can talk all about the fact that, the debt levels are unsustainable, that, the Fed is in a sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they can't increase interest rates too much, because then suddenly, a huge portion of the GDP is going to be going to pay off the debt. It's actually just unsustainable, blah, blah, blah. You can't really go down that tricky path. I also don't think the technology stuff always, resonates. Like, if you start talking to them about addresses and private keys and all these little tricky things, like, I think initially those are some of the hurdles that people have in their brain when they, just trying to conceive of, like, where does this Bitcoin live? Like, where is it? And you go, well, it's UTXOs, like, nah, not interested. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. If you say to people, there's actually no Bitcoin on the blockchain. There is no asset that you hold in a wallet, really. That's just a conceptual thing. There's really just, UTXOs. Your wallet's not even really a wallet. It's just a signing device or a key store. People are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
That's right. Exactly.
None of this interests me at all. Yeah, totally. I think that, like, the macro approach, the synergy with energy, or the cryptography stuff, although that's just infinitely fascinating to me, that's too complicated for people, I think. And also, most people might not even get to that point, but they can still benefit so much from even understanding. Probably the core point that brought most of us to Bitcoin, or at least really got us into it, was the money story, like the evolution of money fractional reserve banking, the debt bubble that we're in, because that you can explain that in a relatively simple fashion. Like time is our most scarce resource, money is a representation of our time, so they should be relatively equivalent. Like there you go. Whereas if you start talking about like the macroeconomic environment and, we're either going to hyperinflate or have a debt collapse, most people are like, look, I don't really understand the whole macro thing. It's very complicated. Luckily, there's some very intelligent people sorting that out. So I'm sure they'll figure it out. You might just not be thinking about it quite right. Or maybe you're taking too simplified of a view. Like I've had that dismissed a lot. Whereas when you talk about money and just that basis of like, it's a battery for your time or your energy, and therefore you want it to be scarce. Most people are like, I agree with that, actually. Like, you're not presenting anything that seems outrageous. And why isn't our money like that? Like, it really opens up the conversation to be able to talk at that really first principles basis and not get too complicated in the stuff that I think we find fascinating, but other people, it's a barrier really to understanding.
That's exactly the case. I think the way I conceive it with people is I say to them, money is sort of a proxy for stored energy, as you say. And so like when you've got inflation, you're effectively undermining your time. And so when politicians or whoever it might be are effectively eroding the value of the time, they're effectively eroding your value as a person. Because why else do we save money but for our future selves, for future consumption? So we're prudent. We take the necessary steps to say, okay, I'm not going to consume today. I'm going to save for my future self. And then you have some sort of official who, at the sort of a flick of a dial, is able to inflate the money supply such that you can buy less stuff, such that you need to now extend the sort of span of your working career. And they've effectively devalued you. And so, sometimes I also find, I paint like a little bit of a bogeyman picture of those the centralized authorities who are incentivized by electoral politics and 2 or 4 year cycles, and they have little to no and their proximity to the money supply means that they tend to be those who are least impacted, and so. It's often like, I don't want to paint too adversarial picture, but I often say like these folks are not, despite whatever they say, they typically are not looking out for your best interests. The best way for you to store your time is in, a sort of digitally scarce, unconfiscatable store of value like Bitcoin that is deflationary. Like you actually have a pre-programmed supply curve. You know exactly what the supply is. The only thing you got to think about is what's the demand. And in that sense, it's easy because most commodities you got to think about because I look at it as like a commodity and say, whether it's gold, whether it's copper, all these different things, you think, okay, well, what's the supply and what's the demand going to be? And they'll meet at some points and they'll determine price. But, when it comes to Bitcoin, we know exactly what the supply is. So, is this thing going to be more or less desirable in the future? Like in a world of, there's a phrase now that I'm going to lose. Limitless abundance, where we can just print things, ad infinitum. Bitcoin is going to stand alone as being the most scarce digital property on earth. And so you're going to want to get a slice of that real estate to protect your future self.
It's just such a good way to distill it, isn't it? And obviously there's a lot of kind of that meme floating around on Bitcoin Twitter of like the infinity symbol divided by 21 million. And I think the more people look at it in that way, the more it starts to become kind of obvious that, this is something you want at least a piece of. I've heard Michael Saylor put it in a way comparing to gold, where gold has an inflation rate around 1.5% each year. And he said, if you buy all of the gold supply today, in 100 years, you'll only own about 25% of the gold supply because it's continued inflating during that time. However, if you buy all of the Bitcoin supply or a portion of the Bitcoin supply today, in 100 years time, in 1,000 years time, you still have that proportion of the Bitcoin supply. And just kind of looking at it on that absolute basis can sometimes be a good way for people to understand it. Whereas you look at fiat currency, it's like whatever you own today in fiat currency, in a year's time, in 10 years time, in 100 years time, you're going to own a much smaller proportion of what you do today. No one can tell you even how much that smaller proportion will be, but it's increasingly getting smaller, at least what the last 100 years or so of history would have told us.
Exactly.
That's like, it's a really good approach that you take, I think, because most people know that politicians will give all sorts of election promises and then not deliver, and they realize some of the incentives are a bit broken in terms of like that 4-year election cycle, as well as being kind of in bed with big business because that's who their political lobbying, parties are. And so I think most people get that. And so being able to put it on that level without making it too much of a, the ominous they or the boogeyman, and kind of really, because you could put people off that way as well, because when you do talk about, they do this, and then you have to clarify, well, central bankers and government, but it's like, well, which government, which party? Are you talking about my guy? Because he couldn't possibly do that. You start to put people off of being like, this is just a conspiracy theory. There's not someone at the top controlling all this stuff. It's like, well, no one can prove otherwise. However, we're not even saying that it is. We're just saying there's a lot of really broken incentives in terms of both of these organizations, like central banks and governments, that would lead to such a thing. And you can see some of those symptoms when you have promises that don't get, fulfilled by politicians, or you have promises that seem to get fulfilled by the people that they know really well personally, or have, a lot of political funding from. Most people will get that part, and they can kind of go like, yeah, I can see that. And if you can then extrapolate that back out to Bitcoin to say, well, you can't probably fix that. We can't fix that self-interest or corruption, but you could just protect a bit of your wealth by holding this thing that they can't do anything about, or they can't manipulate the supply of. Like, that's I think a really good approach to take. And it's a bit deeper than just the what is money. It's more like kind of looks at society and how things function.
Yeah, I think you got to pick your audience. You got to figure out, like, you got to tailor the message to your audience. If like when I was in northern New South Wales, they're a bit anti-authoritarian, so it was much easier for me just to sort of shit all over politicians and speak about how what they're doing. But when I'm talking to sort of my far more sort of straight-laced professional friends who work in insurance and whatnot, I don't take the this is freedom money. Like the sort of like the Klaus Schwab, dystopic vision of the future, because that's certainly not attractive. That's actually going to narrow the pool of people. So I find that, you got to kind of tailor it, because otherwise you do get slapped with labels. It's very easy to get painted with a picture rather than like, which is why it's not that surprising to see these things like, Bitcoiners are psychopaths and narcissistic, etc.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I found it interesting, that study that they referred to had something like, I think it was like 560 people that filled out online surveys. And, they never explain when they put these articles out that firstly, 500 or so people is not a representative sample of probably any sample of a population, let alone the entirety of the population in a distributed across the world population. And on top of that, the kind of people that would agree to that and then sign up and do the survey, there's like a sampling bias there. Like, you're not really getting an accurate representation of everyone. We're just getting a very small proportion of people that are like, I want to have my view known, or I think something very specific about Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. So they never give all the caveats to that. They just put out those weird kind of things. I found it really interesting. I posted this up on Twitter too, so I hate to sort of steal my own content and repeat it. However, the same day that came out in the Sydney Morning Herald, Sunday Morning Herald, or Sydney, either one, the SMH.
Yeah.
When that came out, they had another article that came out on the same day that was all about saying, house prices are out of control, but it's still possible to save for a deposit. And the things that they said that you should do to save for a deposit were make saving a habit, find a high interest saving account. I'm not sure what that means exactly anymore. They were saying like move out of the city, save in your superannuation. If your parents own their house, leverage their house to get a loan. And it's like, holy shit, none of these have anything to do with saving for a property. But buy stocks and ETFs. That was the other thing. And that was their advice. And I mean, the fact that came out within a few hours of the other article about Bitcoin or psychopaths, surely it just leads to that natural conclusion. If you read both of those articles, like, I can just use traditional finance, I can just save a bit harder, I can go with some ETFs, I can get some of my parents' property money and leverage their house, but don't buy Bitcoin. That's for psychopaths. It's like, it just comes to that natural conclusion. And I'm like, is that orchestrated, or does that just coincidentally happen? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm too conspiratorial.
It's breathtaking. No, it's breathtaking. Like, I don't think that's conspiratorial. I think that the quality of journalism, and I use journalism in inverted commas, is not real, because I've actually learned a lot now, having worked in the space, is that, unfortunately, the nature of the game's changed so much that the incentives, it's all about incentives, as you mentioned earlier. And like, the incentives now is not to verify, it's not to actually go and, do some, find a story, get an investigative report out there, do some interviews, take both sides. It's now like it's a click-driven economy. It's about being first, and it's just about like and syndicated content. So the same bullshit story will get republished and repurposed, in 1,000 different places. And so the brands of today, that enjoy so-called authoritative status, like the Sydney Morning Herald or Australian Financial Review, whoever they are in the States, whatever, New York Times, like I think these kind of organizations are finding that unless they want to become obsolescent, they're gonna have to play by the rules of today, which is basic clickbait shit, and that's the game. So I don't take anything they say seriously. So in my orange pilling seminars or sessions, I just say, like, in part 3, where I sort of go, you need to steel man your brain against FUD, because you're not going to get truth from the media. I don't take anything the media says literally at all about anything, especially when you look at Bitcoin. That's where I think they couldn't be more wrong if they tried, because I think all of those who fund them are incentivized to fight Bitcoin. If you look at who ultimately owns a lot of these media companies, if you talk about like the BlackRocks of the world, and I'm talking now, we're going up the sort of chain significantly, you find that a lot of the content and the FUD is coordinated and pushed. Like, I don't know if you felt recently, there's been the kind of this wave of FUD pushed against Bitcoin. And I think it is quite literally coordinated by those who wish to see it fail, because they're the beneficiaries of the current system. And so I tell people just to, like, if you want, I can point you towards people, and I've got a list of like 50 people who I trust, like everyone from Preston Pish to, I always say Lyn Alden, but she's a bit dense, but I say like, even Peter McCormack, listen to the What Bitcoin Did podcast. Like, these are the sources of content you want to go to. Like, don't care. Who cares what Bloomberg or any of these folks have to say? Like, my sister-in-law was talking about, what's that stock picker website here in Australia? Motley Fool. So I don't actually give a shit what they have to say, because I've read lots of articles from them where they, say that Bitcoin's, a Ponzi, it's this, it's that, and now, okay, people want to read about it. Now suddenly you're covering it. Yeah, I don't think you know what you're doing.
Exactly. My dad will often send me newsletters that he's subscribed to, and it'll be really generic stuff from it's like a firm or a fund saying, look, Bitcoin, we think it's it's definitely going to do better than what it has, and we were kind of wrong when we said it wasn't going to do this well. But you know what? You should sign up to this course, and we can explain all about Bitcoin to you. And I'm like, that's not. Thanks, Dad. That's really cool information. But like, there's so much more happening than that. And I think what they've sent you is just an ad. It's an ad for a course that they have, because it's now marketable. They realize people are going to want this sort of content. And you're right. Like, systemically, it's just the incentives are all wrong. Essentially, you've got political, or I say political, but you've got someone like a BlackRock marketing, getting someone else to market something for them, like a journalist in quotations, and they're paying money for that, which makes it very difficult for that media outlet or that journalist to not go ahead and do that. And especially if that person's or media outlet's job is very easy, because all you need to do is then find some sort of derivative content online and kind of paraphrase it, or you just repeat things that are going to get both concerned clicks as well as like angry Bitcoin clicks, and it's the clicks that help you drive further traffic to your site and further revenue. It's like, why wouldn't you post a bunch of FUD? It's easy. There's so many articles you can just like take and paraphrase, and that it's going to get probably more traction than the good news. And of course, if you're getting paid to put that FUD out there as well, it's just all the incentives aligned to having this overwhelming wave of it. And I kind of just the question, which might have even been rhetorical, but yes, I have definitely noticed that there's this coordinated attack. The whole Chris Larsen, Ripple funding, Greenpeace with $5 million, and they just release all this like change the code campaign. And it's just, you spend enough time in Bitcoin, you just see the FUD start to like cycle back on itself. And you're like, oh, these ones again. It's interesting. Yeah. Who's putting this out there now? It's a different media outlet, at least. That's nice. But holy shit, why are we having to like combat this again?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I get fatigued, and I'm a relative noob. Like, I think Peter McCormick could say, I haven't done my first tour of service or a tour of duty, if you like. I haven't done a 4-year cycle. So, I'm still new, and I'm thinking, okay, I've heard this before. I can imagine how, the sort of veterans in space must be like, oh, come on, man. Is this the best you can do? But I think it's all like, I think what we're seeing is just a gradual kind of erosion of trust across all these main institutions, whether it's the governments, whether it's media, whether it's multinationals like the World Health Organization, whoever they might be, and I think just as a necessary kind of consequence, or it's inevitable, you're going to find the incumbents push and fight and resist, and I think that's what we're seeing now. Before ultimately, I think it becomes more or less accepted. I mean, the internet was resisted. I mean, I was still very young, but there's all sorts of quotes you can dig up about and articles that were written about how the internet will never amount to anything.
Exactly. I think you're right too. We're just on this natural progression where I can see parallels where it's happening with the state and politics and government, and it's happening with media, this sort of disillusionment, this just erosion of trust. And you can see it with things like CNBC's, as well as most of the other mainstream media outlets in America. Their viewership has plummeted, sometimes by up to like 90%. But then you've got Joe Rogan, who's like 10 times his viewership during the same time. And you think, well, that shows you where people are going for credible sources of information now. And I guess like it's a hard line, isn't it? Because there'll be people like Marty Bent, who's runs like Tales from the Crypt, which is a pretty prominent podcast. He podcasts with Matt Odell quite a bit. Very kind of technical, but also he kind of understands, I guess, some of the macro stuff going on in the world, and is big in Bitcoin mining. And he is very frustrated by like the whole ESG debate. And I think his mindset, if I'm getting it right, is basically like, we shouldn't be buying into that. We shouldn't be responding to it, because every time we respond to it, we're accepting that framing. Like Bitcoin is bad for the environment. How are we going to make it better? And it's a fine line, isn't it? Because if you don't say anything, then that FUD can gain traction. And then if there's no one dismissing it or arguing against it, maybe it goes on for longer than what it really should. But then it's like, he's right to some degree. You don't want to completely buy into that it's like a debate topic. What's the phrases like gish gallop, where you just like, you throw out a bunch of shit that is not really true, but then after the other person tries to then counter all those points, they run out of any time to actually bring up their own point. And in fact, by countering those points, they've given it some level of credibility, and the viewer can still be like, yeah, but maybe they haven't countered it well enough, and therefore maybe there is some truth to it. So it's stuck between a rock and a hard place. We want to make sure people know the truth, but at the same time not totally buy into like a misinformation campaign and give it the credibility by responding to all of it. There's no solution there, obviously.
Yeah, I honestly, and I think that actually points that's very well put, actually, because I've listened to a lot of what Marty Bent has to say, and I agree. You shouldn't be playing games on your ideological enemy's terms, and you don't want to be too adversarial about it. But the reality is that those who criticize Bitcoin for its energy consumption they're not doing so, in my opinion, for genuine reasons. I think it's very disingenuous. Like the ESG, no one talks about the S and the G. It's all about the E. It's like, do you not think, like, if it's really about this holistic, sort of holistically, like more what Klaus Schwab would describe as like stakeholder capitalism, more responsible capitalism. You're like, okay, if that's what we want, like, we should place as much weight on the social aspects of Bitcoin as well as the governance aspects. And I don't think there's something that has potential to have a bigger social impact on a positive way, like enable, basically allowing people to plan for their future selves, store their time in a deflationary asset that nobody can ever confiscate. Or, on the governance side, like, there's no more fair protocol out there. Like, it's like there's no, the game's not rigged. That everyone can participate in it, and the rules are not going to change. And there's no humans involved. It's all code. And so, like, this is what it's, one of the things, like we spoke about before the podcast, was just like, what are some of the threats? And I think ESG right now is the one. Like, obviously, I think that's the one. I think, it's the single biggest thing. And, on the one hand, I tend to agree with Marty. You've got to kind of, you've got to realize that this is just an attack vector, and this is not being done, this is not a legitimate argument. But at the same time, I think, I hear what you're saying in the sense that if you just kind of remain silent, then what, So I have to imagine in the long run, that sunlight's the best disinfectant. And so I would say, like, I'd rather get more information out there and in good faith counter all what is, in my view, bad faith arguments. And so, you've got to start at the top, and you've got to kind of go, okay, let's talk objectively. Like, how much does it use? Okay, all right. It's like about half of it's green. Okay, but they don't count nuclear. So half of it's green. It consumes 0.05%. Okay, why does it consume energy? Like, we need to explain proof of work then versus proof of stake. That's tricky. And then eventually, like, what I tell people is, okay, so who gets to decide what's a good use of energy? Like, I don't like the Kardashians. Like, I don't think we should be using energy to stream the Kardashians. What do you think about that? Like, and where should we stop? And like, why are you using a tumble dryer today? You could equally just let it sit around your lounge for 3 days and it can dry. It's just as effective, and you'd save the planet. So these are all the kind of discussions I try to have. And like, I try to take it to some sort of absurd level to kind of highlight some of the, say, like, ultimately, when it comes to the ESG thing, to me, what it boils down to, if you don't think Bitcoin has value, like the right amount, I've used this in so many articles and I've repeated it, where, okay, if your view is that Bitcoin is without value, the correct allocation of energy is zero. And that's what I think it boils down to. I don't think it's about the composition of it. I don't think it's about how much. I think it's like, we don't like this, and this is an attack vector.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. I think underpinning all of the debates about it is just that philosophical one of like, is this even worthwhile to put money into or to put energy into? And if the conclusion that they come to is no, then it doesn't matter the amount of energy it takes, or the composition of the energy, or how many transactions it can actually, process for that amount of energy, or how much security you can get. It doesn't even matter. Yeah, if the starting point is it's not worth it, then yeah. And I think bringing it back to an absurd point is really useful sometimes, isn't it? Because it's a bit funny, but it's still accurate on its, what am I thinking here? Like, in terms of its concepts. And people, we have this ability, like, I think humor gets through a lot of the defenses that we have, which is probably why memes are so useful. And like, the memification of a lot of these arguments has been helpful, not just with Bitcoin, but a lot of other things going on in the world at the moment, because people, they see the truth in it and will laugh, even if they don't agree with the truth that's being portrayed, but that might make them more likely to start to believe it, if that makes sense. And so I think, bringing things to peak absurdity in examples that are relatable to people is a really great way of not just orange pilling, but I guess, having an argument or having a debate that ends in like a nice amicable way.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think memes are so valuable, and this is definitely necessary, I think, I think especially the younger generation, like the digitally native crowd, who it just conveys so much in an image. I mean, the one from the last 2 years that I really thought was funny was, where it says like COVID-19, and the one said like, you're sitting down without a mask off, and it's like safe. It's blowing over your head, and then you're sort of walking around, and it's like it's hitting you in the face, and so COVID just blows over your head when you're in a restaurant, so you can take your mask off. I thought that was really funny, and so it just says so much about things. And I think, you're right. Like, humor is a good way of trying to convey the point. But to circle back to, I think ESG. It's one of the it's actually on my radar. Like, I want to do a really nice comprehensive piece. I'm going to rely on, again, my good friend Lyn Alden, and then Nick Carter has done some exceptional work there.
He definitely has,
a lot of, and the funny thing is that actually, like, aside from not only not being bad for the environment, aside from the composition of it, could actually be good, because it helps subsidize the development of renewable energy sources. It helps provide like a buy of last resort for stranded energy. It makes these projects viable from the outset, where you wouldn't otherwise have that revenue, because the miners don't care if in fucking Congo, near, in the middle of a jungle, or if you're like in Serbia or wherever, they'll just go wherever the electricity is cheap. So
Exactly.
It helps fund that infrastructure from the outset. So, again, but this is what I find really difficult. Bitcoin is so multifaceted, and it's got so many moving parts. And it took me, someone reasonably intelligent who really digs into everything, a while to figure it out. That's the real, that's what makes this thing. This is what makes mass adoption sometimes, like in my mind, like it's quite far away, like when it comes really far away in my mind, because that conviction, that enthusiasm, that like this will fix a lot of things, only comes through me spending so many hours of my life in this now. That you know what I mean? Like that's what I find quite tricky. Like for you to fully understand it and appreciate it for all it is, you've got to do the work. Again, there's no shortcuts in this thing. And so the energy thing, you can go, here's an article on energy, but I've listened to hours and hours of stuff on energy and I don't think I've got a great understanding. So it's such a deep and complex topic, Bitcoin, that might be like an obstacle. And I think as Bitcoiners and as developers and all that kind of thing, we've got to figure out how to just create like a user experience that is like, I don't want to say idiot proof, but so seamless, so intuitive, so like, like something that like, it makes it almost impossible, like, not to adopt.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah,
it does, absolutely, and you're right, because I will sometimes get frustrated at friends. Sometimes when I give these examples, I hope they don't ever listen to the podcast. I'm like, hey, you're talking about me, because this is really specific. But I have this friend recently who I've been trying to orange pill, and he gets it, and he first got it just because of my passion. He's like, you're a smart guy. Most of the things that you decide to do end up being quite like you predicted the trend. So I'm into Bitcoin because you're into Bitcoin. And I was like, no, you need to be into Bitcoin more than just that. Like, read all this stuff, listen to these podcasts. Then he's like, yeah, I understand Bitcoin now, the whole store of value thing and scarcity. But like, what about NFTs? And he'll always come back with like, I get Bitcoin, but what about this other thing? Or what about this shitcoin? And it just like, it's really frustrating for me. But then I realized, it took me about 2 years of having Bitcoin as more or less like a second job, researching it. Like I'd get home from work and then I'd spend like 6 hours reading things, watching things. And I do that every day. And I did that for a couple of years. And it was at that point that I'm like, I'm holding a bunch of shitcoins here. I need to buy Bitcoin. That's what got me into this initially. And then I was on this freaking tangent buying all these other things that I thought might be the next Bitcoin or have some sort of utility. They're putting meat on the blockchain now. That's revolutionary. And so it took me 2 years with my very obsessive personality and also finding the right kind of content and not giving up even when there was frustrations to then get to the point of like, it's about Bitcoin. I need to be into Bitcoin only. So for me to expect friends who aren't putting that sort of time in and probably never would, it would take them 10 years to get that 2 years worth of content perhaps, it's probably unreasonable of me to expect them to be at that point. And you're right, we need to, it's consistency, it's a bit of patience, but I think over time, like sharpening the tools enough to where there's a bit of a streamlined process, like you say, like an idiot-proof one where they're on the right track, they're going to get, introduced with the right amount of information at the right time where it's not too overwhelming. And that, dismisses the FUD before they even go about reading that. But I mean, I guess that's like I don't know how long we go until we have that, but I think it's being pulled together now as we all do these sort of talks and write articles and, talk to friends. But you're right. I think we're sort of missing that really streamlined process that will make most people just grok it really quickly. I think we're years away from proper adoption until we can have something like that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I actually suspect that what will probably happen is people will start owning it without knowing it because the supers are going to get involved, and because they're realizing slowly but surely that this is if they don't run with this, they're going to again risk being obsolete, and they're going to have clients leave. So I suspect that, like I've said to people, and that within 5 years, I suspect most people will own Bitcoin in Australia and they don't know it. It's simply because there'll be an allocation in a portfolio to a spot ETF. Now, again, I don't recommend anyone buys any kind of ETF when it comes to Bitcoin. I mean, I don't think it's absolutely pointless, but at least then they're in. And at that point, then once they can start seeing the positive benefits it has within the portfolio, and they start getting positive reporting from, let's say, some of the trusted voices of today, whether, whoever the supers are, then maybe that will slowly start kind of, okay, I need to take more notice of this. Let me learn about it. And then you can start telling people, okay, now what I would probably do is now start buying, your own coins and sort of storing them yourself. Because to me, that's what really matters here. The being able to custody your own assets. I think that is what's so valuable. I mean, like Canada, I feel terrible for like the people who contribute and all that stuff, but I think that was one of the best episodes, and this will be seen in 10 years' time. It's one of those watershed moments in history where a Western liberal democracy said, we don't like what you stand for, so we're going to just confiscate and intercept all this money. like a authoritarian, and like I was like, oh, okay, come on, there's not a better advert for Bitcoin. Like, I don't know what is,
it feels like Justin Trudeau is on the Bitcoin payroll. Like, that was the best marketing I think we've ever gotten. And even just some of the words that he used of like, there's people with unacceptable opinions or unacceptable perspective. You think, holy shit, like you couldn't write this stuff any better, and you're doing it organically. Like, how does this happen?
Yeah, I couldn't agree.
You're absolutely right. I do think, like, kind of even going back to the an orange pilling strategy is like showing someone Bitcoin, sending them some Bitcoin, and then they start to get it. Like, I think that's going to happen naturally, where you're right, it becomes an allocation in their superannuation, or they start, they transact, and then it happens to be using the Bitcoin payment rails, and they say like, oh, I didn't even know that was Bitcoin. That's interesting. And it's what then forces them to start to look into it more. Like, most people have no idea what's in their superannuation for the most part anyway. But I think once they just start seeing the word more, or they have a conversation about it with their financial planner or their super fund, or they get a letter that says, oh, we're reallocating some of your position to this Bitcoin thing because we think it's got some legs for the next 10 years or whatever, that will prompt people to take it more seriously. Yeah. And I think like game theory essentially is playing out for fund managers, because once one of them has it in their fund, everyone else is benchmarked usually against their performance, which it is just like a no-brainer for everyone to have their fund set up in a very similar way. That way, if you underperform, actually the whole market kind of underperforms. So you can be like, hey, look, you wouldn't have done that much better with our competitor anyway. Same as if, you overperform, everyone else is kind of there too, but you can still use it as a selling point. So I guess my point here is that if one fund manager or fund puts Bitcoin on the balance sheet, or puts Bitcoin in people's it just makes sense for most of the rest to do exactly the same thing, just in case that happens to perform very well. Because even if it doesn't perform that well, it's not really that bad anyway, because if everyone's doing it, you've all got the same out, basically, as a fund manager or financial planner. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think there's I call it like a CYA culture, cover your ass culture, where basically like there's a huge amount of risk in being a first mover. But whether it's a nation state, whether it's a fund manager, whatever the case may be, and I think gradually it becomes less and less risky over time. You want to see what your peers are doing, and that's why I think countries are looking at El Salvador, and they kind of want to see how that experiment plays out. They want to see how the Bitcoin bonds go, and I think you're seeing like smaller jurisdictions, really kind of saying, "Hey, we're Bitcoin friendly. We want all the talent, we want all the capital. Like, come across here." And it's all like the fringe players. I don't want to say fringe players as in like North Korea, but fringe as in like, these are not like, it's not a G7 nation, but, whether it's like on the corporate side or like on an international scale, I think you're going to find some of the more nimble players, like Saylor. I mean, he owns MicroStrategy, so he can do what the hell he wants, And so, but eventually if the strategy plays out and it becomes more widely used, then we will see Apple and we will see Google allocate a portion of their treasury to Bitcoin. It's just that, they just don't have that sort of appetite. And so I think that's necessarily like where it is going. And I think there's just an enormous amount of kind of institutional conservatism because there's a lot of risks, at least, there's sometimes being stagnant and doing the same thing is, like, from their perspective, a far better strategy than just trying to embrace innovative technologies after actually doing the work.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, as you said, the first mover is a risky position. but then being second and third becomes kind of a no-brainer, and then the rest just pile in, especially if it happened to be a good bet, which I think we expect it will.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I've got like a few final sort of questions for you. We've talked.
I'll keep it short. I know that I've been a bit for both, so let's
No, whatsoever. And yeah, I think you mentioned even before we started recording that you might have some questions for me. We might have covered that as we've gone through, but if you have any, sort of think of what they are, and we'll cover that at the end as well. But we've talked about a bunch of stuff that I think people should be bullish about with Bitcoin, that I think we are obviously about too. But what do you think you're most bullish on in regards to Bitcoin?
Lightning. I'm super bullish on Lightning. I love what I'm seeing, coming out of Strike. I love the Terra update recently and what that entails. I think the network's looking really healthy at the moment, in terms of, the hash rate reaching all-time highs, mining difficulty reaching all-time highs. I mean, price is a liar, as Mark Yusko says. So, I look at those kind of things. I know on-chain's getting a little bit, knocked back these days for its lack of reliability in predicting the moonshots that we're hoping for. But, 60% of Bitcoin holders haven't moved in a year or something to that effect. There's evidence of growing convictions. I look at, I saw some stats around, holders, they call us minnows, but we're sort of snapping up coins at the moment. And it just speaks to this growing cohort of people with high levels of conviction. So I think that's great. I think, institutional adoption is continuing, and it's coming from the ground up. So that, the clients are demanding it. I think the macro conditions are perfect. So I'm super bullish on that. I think this will be an inflationary decade. I think we've never seen such high levels of debt and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is Bitcoin's prime time, this decade, in my view. And then there's also sort of I love seeing, there's a huge amount of conflict going on around the world at the moment, populism, inequality. I see today, I just saw Sri Lanka said we're bankrupt. Lebanon just said we're bankrupt, the central bank, etc. So the world, there's a huge amount of anger, and I think there's just tumultuous times ahead, and nation states are I think you've tweeted about this, I think previously, about the sovereign individual, but I think that we're seeing the sovereign individual thesis play out together with the fourth turning, and this is again, I think, Bitcoin's time. So I think this whole from a demographics perspective, from a long-term debt cycle perspective, I'm loving what I'm seeing coming out of these smaller jurisdictions like Lugano in Switzerland, and there's a little island in Honduras recently announced they would be accepting Bitcoin as legal tender. So there's so much going on. So if you're trading, you care about price, but if you're here for the long haul, like most of us, then I just think these are all amazing metrics. I don't know, what is the thing on your mind that you're most excited about?
Look, you have probably covered a lot of it. I would say I'm most bullish on Bitcoin is because conversations like this, seeing things like what Jack Mallers is doing, Michael Saylor, some of those sort of big names that are targeting this from various angles, like the institutional adoption. I think Jack Mallers' announcement, that's almost like Bitcoin as legal tender in America through the back door, because it's now going to be available at point of sale in the majority of places, which means, sure, it's not made legal tender yet, but that's just a huge step towards it. You've got developers that are really focusing on privacy a lot more, both Lightning and on-chain. You've got institutional miners that are obviously exponentially scaling their institutional mines, but also making home mining more available as well. So when you look at all these things, it's Bitcoiners are just, we're attacking the legacy system in a way that's not even attacking the legacy system. It's just building up this new parallel system and economy from so many different angles that, to me, it just seems inevitable at this point. And I think it's just Bitcoiners, that the fact that there's so many generous, honest, innovative people in this space that are willing to take a bit of a risk, but then not just keep barreling ahead if it doesn't work. They kind of are receptive to feedback and then willing to kind of shift based on that. I think that But that's the benefit of an open network, really. You only need to have one person innovating and everyone benefits. But we've got a lot of people innovating on a lot of different fronts. So I think it is just really a matter of time.
Totally. And you know what? One thing I'd add, sorry to do that, but
No.
like I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing like out of the US in terms of regulatory stuff, because my sense, my read, because like this is where I spend all my time in the news and whatnot, is in the next year or two, we're going to see some really clear sort of guidance notes on Bitcoin as a commodity and everything else as a shitcoin. Maybe, and this is what I've understood, that Ethereum could be now construed as sufficiently decentralized to be a commodity. So in the US, they're regulated by two separate entities, but without a doubt in my mind, like sort of 90% of the other stuff is just unregulated, like venture capital. It's basically just unregistered securities, and I just think that a lot of them, I think this decade, I think between now and 2025, I believe that you're going to see the great unwinding of all the shitcoins, at least like 95% of them. And I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing, because in the US, because when I feel as if they drive the sort of regulatory conversation globally. And this is just my inclination. And from the people that I listen to and trust, I think that they're going to clamp down super hard. And NFTs too. I mean, if I want to raise $100,000 in Australia, I'd have to get like a financial service license, blah, blah, blah. Or I could just go and create like a shitcoin and do an ICO, or I could go and like create a bunch of JPEGs and market it with a celebrity. I mean, you can't have two different regulatory systems, I guess is the point I'm making. And so I know that's going to change within the next 2 to 3 years. And so I'm very bullish on where it's going. Yeah,
very true. And Michael Saylor, there was a very recent podcast. I say very recent, but probably it was about 3 months ago, but in today's time frame.
Yeah.
He podcast with Raoul Pal, and he was talking about how he believes, from his understanding of securities laws and the fact that he has a team of lawyers looking into these kind of things for him as well, that you're exactly right. Like the majority of shitcoins are going to be seen as unregulated securities, and they're going to be unwound. And he's not alone in saying that. I think we've kind of gotten that signal from a lot of different angles. And with something like you mentioned before, like Taro, like that being available to more or less consume those altcoins, but for them to not need to have their own issuance of a new token and instead be just sort of underpinned by sats. It means that innovation that happens in other cryptocurrencies at the moment could then be done on Bitcoin without all those securities implications. Because the way that I often explain it to people when they say, well, okay, there's this whole crypto thing and there's Bitcoin. Why are you into Bitcoin? It's like, well, Bitcoin is better money. All the rest of the shitcoins are more or less like buying a stock, except you're not really buying a stock. You're just like buying into an idea and hoping that everyone else buys into the idea. But some of these ideas, they haven't actually found their purpose just yet. So I think there's still some level of benefit to having that around, letting people innovate. But perhaps removing the propensity to scam or rug pull, or like you say, to sort of like be on the outskirts of regulation, which then stops it really being adopted as an industry. That makes a lot of sense to me. And also I see that as being inevitable. Regulators are going to regulate. They're just trying to get their head around how to do that exactly now. And
I think it's driven by tax, Justin. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to slice the action, and they want to be able to. That's why I think another risk down the track will be like they want to know, like exactly where all of your assets are stored, and that's going to compromise privacy, and that'll that's a whole separate conversation. But because I think ultimately, just like any other asset, if it grows in value, the toll collectors want a piece of the pie. So I think that's where it's going as well.
Two, I guess, things that have happened relatively recently related to this is Jerome Powell making the comment that there is, hypothetically a world where America is not the only world reserve currency. Like hearing something like that shows that there is a shift, and that the people in the know that are trying to control that shift, like it's obvious to them that it's happening, and now they're trying to get out in front of it. Janet Yellen has been obviously quite derogatory towards Bitcoin, throughout all the time. And, I think she's the one that coined the transitory term around inflation. So obviously not a credible source of information. However, I found it really interesting that there was that 30-minute US Treasury presentation that she gave, and it was very complimentary of Bitcoin. I mean, she's reading off a script and it was all very monotone. However, the fact that she got up there and still said those things about how Bitcoin solves the double spend problem, Bitcoin creates a payment rails that is, out of central control. And she said these things like it was a good thing, which is the first time that she's shown some depth of understanding about Bitcoin, but also then conveyed it in a natural, like a positive light. And in there, she was saying, what Bitcoin doesn't do is it doesn't do transactions quickly, which we know is obviously wrong. But she used that to then set up to say, well, maybe we need a stable coin or a CBDC to be the medium of exchange. But that's kind of alluding to the fact that then Bitcoin or something would be a store of value. So the fact that they're now saying the part that we've been saying all along, they're now saying it too, is to me very telling that they can see what's happening and they're now trying to, kind of nudge it in a way that's going to be beneficial for them or whoever. But at least they're now, not just completely opposing it, not just saying there'll only ever be one world reserve currency against the US dollar and Bitcoin's got nothing to offer anyone and the world reserve currency of US dollar is actually a store of value too. Like they're not saying those things anymore. It's gradually slipping to the narrative that we've all known for the last however long we've been in Bitcoin, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was actually like a deep fake. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It didn't look real. Yeah.
I saw it circulating and I was like, I'm not even going to like or retweet this because it's going to end up being fake. And it was only until someone went and were like, no, I've gone to the YouTube site. It's their official site. And look, here's their official like White House press release or whatever that has it word for word. And I was like, holy shit, this is real. When you find the YouTube video, it actually doesn't look anywhere near as green screened as the one that's floating around on Twitter. But very, very interesting developments for sure. You mentioned the privacy part there, where eventually, government in terms of taxation, they're going to want to know like where is all your worth, where are you holding it, what are the keys that it's in, or even just the public keys, etc. Would you see that as one of the biggest threats to Bitcoin, or is there something else that's on your mind that might be a decent threat we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that is a threat. I think the free market will figure out solutions faster than they can, the government can move. So I think I'm confident there. I think again, this is not my wheelhouse, but whether it's coin join or coin mixes, or I think there's going to be all sorts of technologies that can be used and tools. And I think there's far smarter people than I kind of working on this already. So I think it's a threat, but I think it's really going to. I suspect that in the future, new entrants are going to have far greater scrutiny than those today. Like just me going through my tax returns with my accountant here, like it just shows me how like behind the eight ball everyone is. Like they just don't know what they're doing, frankly. And I say that with respect, but it's just like it just everything, just in terms of the way things are like tracked and managed. And so it's to my mind, like those of us who are currently in and who have, an allocation, I think that, we, for the most part, are probably going to be, we're going to escape a lot of these more onerous draconian stuff that's coming down the track, where I think in the future, like, there will be more sort of, I think new users are going to have a lot more, they're going to be like, because of the UX and everything, they're going to be pushed to the centralized exchanges, which are going to have more and more requirements. They're going to have to know the identity of the address who's getting sent to. So, and you're going to have to register that with, whichever new, bureaucratic authority they set up. Like, I'm sure there's something like that coming. But I also think that there's a potential. Also, I think the other risk to Bitcoin is just shitcoinery and that kind of thing, and scams, and a lot of people. It just kind of slows things down. I don't think any of these things are fatal. I just think they're kind of like, in MMA terms, I think it's like getting a liver kick, like it hurts like hell. Maybe you'll be like, you'll sort of capitulate or drop on the floor. You're kind of going between rounds. So like maybe you can just survive and then you'll come back. Like, I think it's fatal, but these are just like roadblocks, sometimes worse than others.
Exactly, like distractions more than anything. I think I agree with that, like those two as attack vectors. Cryptocurrency probably quite likely is an attack on Bitcoin, whether it's orchestrated or not, or whether it's just happened that way through incentives. It is a huge distraction, and it's something that's probably more easily, obviously because it's centralized, to regulate, to clamp down on, and then to control. So I think, being able to talk about shitcoins, memify the responses, and make people know why Bitcoin's different, sort of a way around that. But you're right, I think it's just a distraction in the meantime. And privacy, I can see that, like the travel rule that you mentioned, kind of a lot of those recommendations from the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, really push towards things like that. Like everyone needs to be KYC'd. They can't withdraw it unless it's clear what wallet they're withdrawing to. I mean, you look at the way that Russia's even doing their implementation of cryptocurrencies. It's very similar, where they're saying, okay, you got to pass a test. And if you pass a test, you can buy up to this amount. And if you don't pass a test, you can only buy, a very, very small amount. And whenever you buy, you need to go to this organization that we set up called Transparent Blockchain and give them all your extended public keys, so they can track everything that you do from that point on. And if you don't do that, you're not allowed to own cryptocurrency. And if you do, then you're a criminal. So it's like, I can see, obviously that's Russia. That's one example. They haven't done that specifically yet. They're talking about that being part of it. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But to me, I do think we're heading that direction. And therefore, you're right. Like the people who are in now or have been in the last 13 years are going to be somewhat, exempt isn't the right word, but we're going to be on the outskirts. That's much harder to do that with. And the beautiful thing is, like what you alluded to as well, is that privacy tools are there now to actually circumvent most of that sort of problem. Not that because being private is because you're being dodgy, but I think privacy is a right that people should have. You don't need to have your employer knowing what you spend your Bitcoin on or your balance. You don't need the shop owner knowing all those things either. But I guess the point is that all of those technologies, all of those implementations, they're going leaps and bounds. Like some of my favorite Bitcoin conference segments were on the open source forum, talking about like coin joins, coin swaps, like federated side chains to do private transactions, as well as all the Lightning Network privacy improvements. So like all that stuff is just barreling ahead and way faster than the regulation will ever be able to catch up or circumvent. I guess a parallel. I think of like the whole encryption wars or the crypto wars from like 70s, 80s, 90s, and America trying to say like, you're not allowed to export this stuff because it's like a weapon. You're not allowed to even sell it. You're not allowed to talk to people about it. We want to regulate it. And eventually it got recognized as free speech, because it's like, well, you can just print this code out on a t-shirt. You can just say it to someone over the phone. Like this is not a weapon. This is something that is just words. And I guess the point there is that like it was tried to be shut down, encryption, but the development, it was just too far away for regulation to ever catch up, and it became the horse that bolted. I think the same kind of thing for Bitcoin privacy. It's already there now, but it's going to get better regardless of what regulation does. But still useful threats for us to consider and I guess have on our mind, and just to kind of work into the thesis. So any tangent topics that Bitcoin got you into that you didn't realize that you were going to get into?
I think what it has, I think the privacy and security element is definitely one. I have, I think there is like an opportunity for a company to basically say, okay, we're going to de-Googlefy and de-Googlefy your life, and we're going to shift you to all these open source things. Because I honestly and I'm not sort of like a Luddite in this respect, but I find embracing all the different aspects of it, like it can be quite daunting and it's quite exhausting, and and the UX is not always the best, and I'm not sure where to go with that stuff. But that's something that has piqued my interest, and it's something that I'm working on. So that's kind of the one thing I think. But on like a sort of on a philosophical or like a broadly speaking, I think I mentioned in the beginning of our chat, which was really like it's really just given me the sense of low time preference, thinking where, I think long term with regards to everything. And I just see sort of high time preference thinking everywhere. And I sort of, it's so obvious, knowing that like the average Aussie can't put $500 together to pay for an emergency, buying, spending money on cars and all sorts of other shit that you don't need, instead of storing value for the future, like this consumerism and like nihilism. It's kind of made me realize like, so like there's no shortcuts. Anything valuable, anything worthwhile takes time. If you like, whether you're eating, like whether it's your diet, whether it's like, like your Bitcoin conviction. I mean, it's taken me like, honestly now thousands and thousands of hours to get there. But yeah, so there's no shortcuts. It's like proof of work, you need to do the work. That's basically it. And also like, it's got me interested in kind of wanting to do good. in the future. And I'm sort of like, I've started getting involved quietly on the side with a project that's trying to kind of orange pull African continent, because that's obviously where I'm from, and they've suffered endless amounts of hyperinflation and outright theft and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of got my more charitable mindset ticking. So, and like it's given me hope and optimism. So like in that regard, I know that a lot of people have got into like the seed oil thing, the carnivore diet, which I'm thinking of the carnivore diet because I've actually got psoriasis, like, autoimmune disease. Like it's not too bad. It's a couple of patches on my skin, but I've thought about doing it like with Jordan Peterson, salt and meat for like a month, or Joe Rogan did it. But yeah, so I think there are these different things, and it's like, I think it's all about just trying to optimize your life. I think that, I don't know, what's your experience been?
It's similar to you, the time preference thing. Something that I used to say to people a lot. And then I think only getting into Bitcoin really started to take my own advice or realize I was, I should have been doing this all along, is the secret ingredient to anything is time. You can do within certain like confidence interval parameters, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can learn whatever you want. You can be skillful at whatever you want. But the secret ingredient is time. And of course, repetition of whatever that is that you're trying to learn during that time. And Bitcoin to me has just really drummed home that low time preference for pretty much everything in life now. Like it's very difficult not looking at things in that same way, because I know I'm being disingenuous whenever I do. And so trying to work that into everything. Like I've always been, I say always, like when I was about 20, 21, I really got into working out. I was really overweight and ended up losing a bunch of weight and kind of wanted to gain muscle. And then I got into like BJJ and a few other sort of different sports to just like kind of keep that going. So I've always been relatively good with fitness and eating right, and knowing that, look, if I just keep putting the time in, I'll see the benefits that I want, whether it's physique or whether it's strength or endurance or a particular sport type thing. So I've sort of known that, but I don't know, it just didn't really, it wasn't prolific throughout the rest of my life. Whereas Bitcoin has really made it become that like core foundational thing that I come back to, is just to realize time's a secret ingredient. If I want to do this, I just need to start. It's not going to be perfect when I start. In fact, it's going to be shit, but that's okay. That's how it's meant to be. And then over time, it's going to get better. And then I'm going to meet other people that do that same thing, and they're going to motivate me, and there's going to be opportunities that come up, and then I can kind of teach someone else about it and like solidify my knowledge that way. And all that comes from determination and time. And so, yeah, that's been probably the biggest thing for me. But you put it in a different way there as well, which I think resonated, which is like having a passion that's solving a problem in the world. Because I've known for a very long time, since I was very small, I think as a kid, like something's broken in the world and I want to do something about that, but I don't know what that is. And I don't want to waste time on something that's not actually going to fix it. And so I went down the path of like, it's corruption, or it's, self-interest, or maybe it's politics. Maybe we just get rid of politics and that'll be fixing it. Or it's all these different things. But then I realized like, money is the root of all of that. Money is at the core that creates this system with rules that we then operate within. And that creates that corruption, that self-interest. And there's certain pockets where you can point it out and be like, yeah, there I see it. But it's like, it's not just because of that area like politics. It's because of the underpinning stuff. So yeah, to me, it gave me an insight into the problem, and knowing that I could do something to fix it just gives me this infinite amount of passion for it. And of course, when that becomes prolific with the rest of life in terms of low time preference, it's hard to deviate away from that. It just becomes this very reinforcing, incentivized cycle to keep doing that. And it's very genuine. I think other people see it and hear it, and it's like they start resonating the same thing, and it becomes sort of very addictive or contagious, really, that mindset.
Absolutely. Because look, the easiest path to riches right now is not in Bitcoin. Like it's possibly investing or trading in these other shitcoins, but also if you wanted to be in this space, in the crypto space, there's all sorts of Web3 and all sorts of other bullshit that is flashy, that is attracting a lot of capital, a lot of interest, and there's money to be made. To me, like it's almost as if by doing Bitcoin, you are pursuing what I think is the most valuable for humanity long term. And you're not starting with the goal of making money. Although, let's be honest, we'd all like to become wealthy and have fuck you money. That would be the dream. But in the process, the journey is so much more rewarding and authentic. And it speaks to the low time preference, as you say. I'm not focusing with the end in mind, like how do I try and extract money today or next month or a year from now? But I'm thinking like in a decade, 2 decades. Like I'm looking forward to knowing. Like I'm so excited to see what happens in the next 5 years. Like Preston Pish said it at the conference, like buy Bitcoin and go to sleep for 5 years. And in a way, like I just want to do that because it makes me think like I'm so in the weeds every day that like I'm like a kid who just wants to see this thing. I want to see this thing unfold and see how this thing takes over the world. And I know that it's inevitable, and I don't feel as if that's hyperbolic. But it's really cool, as you say, being in a space that you're really passionate and motivated by. So yeah, I think that sums it up for me. Hey?
It's kind of ironic, isn't it, where it does seem to be all happening very quickly. Like every morning I wake up and I have this just enthusiasm, feel like I want to know what happened during the last 8 hours. Like and there's always something big. There seems to be some news that I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is happening now. I thought this was years away. But then at the same time, there's that irony of going like, I want to see where we get to in like 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. Like I want to jump to those time points just to see like how far has it come. But I guess we've got to be patient with it and know that there's still plenty of news that happens day to day anyway.
Yeah, I've got to run in about 5 minutes, Justin. But
no worries.
The last thing I wanted to tell you was this is how I suspect. I hope it'll play out like this. It's slowly but surely, like it's the Parker Lewis thing, the gradually then suddenly. I honestly think that there's going to be something that catapults Bitcoin into the stratosphere, and I like on a price level, but also just in like a holy shit, we need this, like this rush to sound money. And I don't know what's going to be like the event, and I don't know when it's going to happen. I reckon it's in the next decade. I think it could be a central bank announcing that they've put it on their balance sheet. It could be like Apple put it on their balance sheet. It could be any number of things. It could be the US saying we're going to have our dollars backed by Bitcoin. I don't know what it is. I think it's going to be something huge, and it will be this holy shit moment. And that's when I think it happens. Hyper Bitcoinization. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say before we ended.
Definitely. I agree with that thesis. And look, I've only just recently read The Sovereign Individual and The Fourth Turning. It took me years to get to them, but both very prescient books, aren't they? And both predict essentially that within the next 10 years or so, or probably within the next 8, because we're already a couple in, that we will see. I mean, we're already seeing parts of it, but we'll see that final catalysm where it then starts to move into a whole different standard. So I agree with you there. Well, I guess that's probably your final thoughts. Would you let people know where they could, follow you or check out even the Bitcoin? The Bitcoin Shepherd.
Yeah, for sure. So so if you're interested if you're kind of new to Bitcoin, you're a beginner and you want to sort of just kind of be orange-pilled and from the ground up using first principles, you can go to thebitcoinshepherd.com. You can reach out via email, or you can schedule an appointment right there. Alternatively, you can just follow me on Twitter. I should get more active on Twitter these days. Otherwise, I also write for cryptonewsaustralia.com.au. So you can go and just see what articles I write about there. But yeah, generally, it's been great, Justin. Thanks so much for the opportunity, man. I've really enjoyed it, and hope we get to do it again sometime.
Definitely, absolutely. Look, there's always new news in Bitcoin, so I've really enjoyed this conversation too. So I think maybe we do like a revisit in a month or two or something like that, just to see what's going on and touch base again.
For sure, man. I'm at the coal phase, so yeah, I've always flooded with like new stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I didn't realize that article this morning was yours that I read, so I'll pay more attention now because I'm sure that I'll probably come across your work way more than what I realize when I've read something informative. So I'll do that from now on, pay more attention to that.
Cheers, man.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the show. Thanks everyone for listening, of course, and hope you enjoyed. Otherwise, until next time.